YouTube. And you can always join in on the conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks so much for watching. I'm John Quinones.
ABC News, straightforward.
This is an ABC News election update.
Welcome to ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us. We'll be bringing you updates on the votes in the South Carolina primary all night. We are just about an hour away from the polls closing. Former Vice President Joe Biden has been the front runner in this state. Zareen Shaw joins us from Columbia, South Carolina, from the Biden headquarters. And Zareen, just curious, how is the mood there right now?
Hi, Eva. Any second now, crowds will be pouring into this venue right behind me here in Columbia. They haven't come here yet, but Joe Biden is expecting this to be his victory party here tonight. He still has not had a win so far in this race. He is trailing in the delegate count behind candidates like Bernie Sanders, but this is the most diverse state in this race so far, and Joe Biden has incredible support in the black community. Now, our reporter Johnny Vrahovic, he caught up with Joe Biden earlier today. There's been a lot of talk about what kind of win Joe Biden needs in this race, in this state right now. He wouldn't give us a specific number, but he did say the bigger the win, the bigger the bump going into Super Tuesday. He also said he's been raising a lot of money so far, about $1 million a day this week. But in terms of money, Tom Steyer has actually been the one who has spent the most in this state, $13 million just on ads. And even though Joe Biden has been banking on this state, Tom Steyer has actually had twice as many events just in this state alone. He is also the only other candidate who is in this state tonight. All the other candidates have already moved on to most of the other Super Tuesday states. Eva?
Speaking of the money, a lot of questions have now started to come about what will Biden do. Let's say he wins tonight. Does he have the money really to push into Super Tuesday? Have they given any sense of what their strategy will be going forward?
You know, they haven't really given much of an indication, but there is, of course, there are candidates like Michael Bloomberg, who've already spent more than $500 million in this race alone. He's prepared to spend so much more. He won't even give a specific number on how much he's willing to spend to battle against Donald Trump. So that is an uphill climb for many of the candidates here in this race going forward.
All right. Zareen Shaw for us there at the Biden headquarters. Bernie Sanders has been leading the Democratic field so far. His campaign is spending the night in Virginia. That's where senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer joins us live from Virginia Beach. And I guess the first question is, why is Bernie not in South Carolina tonight?
Yeah, it's quite something, isn't it, Eva, that the front runner in this race isn't in the primary state of South Carolina tonight? Well, he's actually very much focused on Super Tuesday, where a third of those delegates will be decided just a couple days from now. The Sanders campaign has sort of acknowledged that South Carolina will go the way it will, and they don't really need to win South Carolina. They like to win it. They're predicting a close finish tonight, but they're very much focused on a big sweep of delegates on Tuesday. One of those states voting, of course, is right here in Virginia. Senator Sanders will be taking the stage behind me just in about an hour from now. This is an area that is very supportive of Senator Sanders, but this blitz that he's had, Eva, over the past few days is indicative of just how confident they are that they are racking up a huge delegate lead headed into Tuesday night.
Speaking of tonight, though, that's first things first, right? Have they given any sense of what they are expecting the numbers to look like for Bernie Sanders tonight?
Yeah, well, these early exit polls that have already started to come in just in the past hour or so indicating it could be a tough night for Bernie Sanders. You know, he only won 13% of the black vote in South Carolina, the critical African-American vote in that state back 4 years ago with Hillary Clinton. Tonight, his performance among African-American voters is going to be scrutinized. The campaign, confident they've made some inroads over these past 4 years. They've invested about as much time and money in the state of South Carolina as Joe Biden has. But again, those early numbers coming out as voters are leaving the polls today in South Carolina, starting to give us a glimpse that they feel very strongly about Joe Biden. It's a much more moderate electorate, not as fond of Bernie Sanders. So their mission tonight, the campaign tells me, is to close the gap with Joe Biden. They want a close race. They'd consider that a win, and they're moving on with all the momentum from those early states to Tuesday night.
All right, Devin Dwyer for us there. And speaking of the exit polls, those results are coming in. Let's go to our Deputy Political Director, Mary Alice Parks, in our D.C. Bureau for more. If you can just kind of break down what we're seeing here right now, Mary Alice.
Well, as we were expecting, it looks like Joe Biden will really dominate with African-American voters. Now, in the past, African-American voters have made up as much as 60% of Democratic primary voters in this state. Looks like it could be a little bit lower than that, according to our preliminary exit polls. But still, we're talking about a majority of Democratic voters in South Carolina being African-American, and they are heavily favoring Joe Biden, the former vice president, according to our early exit polls. But a few more numbers that really stuck out to me. This one, about 51%, according to our early exit polls, said they think that the next president should return to Obama-like policies, and only 29% showing that they think the next president should enact more liberal policies. That is very different than what we've seen in some of the other early states. In New Hampshire, we saw nearly a 50-50 split on that. So that suggests to me that we're looking at a much more moderate electorate in South Carolina, and that will probably favor Joe Biden as well. Another number that stood out to me, who understands minorities, racial and ethnic minorities? Again, it looks like in that Joe Biden, really the outstanding favorite in the early exit polls. That will really benefit him in a state like South Carolina. And as these early numbers from our exit polls start coming in, one more I'm going to point us to, it looks like a pretty large portion of this group of voters, 44%, decided earlier than this month that they were who they were going to vote for. And that is just a lot larger than what we've seen in the last few early states. Again, we're getting some indications that Joe Biden is really benefiting from that, benefiting from people who perhaps didn't watch the last few debates, didn't mind how Joe Biden performed in the last few debates, and decided pretty early on who they were going to vote for.
All right, thank you there, Mary Alice. And what does this mean for the Democratic Party? Our ABC consultants, Yvette Simpson and former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, join us now. And I want to start with you, Yvette. You were shaking your head a lot as you were watching those early polling data come in.
No surprises at all there. Like, it all makes sense to me. You know, South Carolina voters, predominantly older, more moderate voters, want to go back to the Obama days, which is why you heard Vice President Biden saying, hey, you know, me and Obama are pals. This is what we did together. He's my person. And then you add the Clyburn effect. You know, Jim Clyburn endorsed him a couple days ago. Not only is he kind of the voice of South Carolina, especially among black voters, but he also has an organizing machine that in South Carolina that can dispatch people, organizers, in a very, very quick time period. So I think those are all weighing in his favor. He's got some strong black surrogates down there.
We've seen Clyburn today talking about the fact that Biden's campaign needs to be organized maybe differently going forward into these Super Tuesday states. What do you think that means?
You know, he wasn't really building a machine. He kind of was relying on old relationships. You heard him say in Iowa, hey, we're relying on the relationships that we've always had. Well, what we know is that the electorate shifts. You know, some of those folks, they might have been with you before. They might not be with you now. Now you're kind of the guy. You're not kind of standing with Obama. What do they think about you? Also, not ignoring young, new voters. And so I think what Clyburn is saying is, you got my support. Now you got to win this thing, and we got to shake this thing up a bit. You also heard a lot of him kind of right after he would make a speech, he would run out. He wouldn't stay and talk to people. He wasn't really being as available. He wasn't doing a lot of events, whether or not he had a strong enough organizing presence. And so I think Clyburn is saying, I put my weight behind you. You're my candidate. Now let's get a campaign that's going to be able to get the rest of the states. I think he's going to win a lot in the southern states, especially kind of those southeastern states. And Clyburn wants to make sure that he gets that momentum going across the entire country.
Heading into Super Tuesday.
Right.
Now let's bring in Heidi there. Biden has talked about the fact that South Carolina is his firewall. He's expecting a big turnout, a big performance in South Carolina tonight. How big does he have to win to really get a bump into Super Tuesday?
I think without a doubt he's got to be in double digits, if not triple or double digits, you know, in the 20% range. But you also have to look at how the delegates are going to be distributed. And he could come out of this with the second highest delegate count, or maybe even, depending upon how Senator Sanders does, he could come out of this leading in the delegate count, which would be a huge momentum change.
Is that enough, though, to get him into Super Tuesday? States that he hasn't really spent a whole lot of money in, and the other candidates, many of them have spent a lot of money in those states.
Well, I think that the critical piece of this is that the Senator Sanders won't be getting a bounce. He won't be sending the message that I'm the invincible front-runner candidate. This is still a competition. And so I think as you see more and more of the moderates continue to operate in this primary season, it's going to be interesting to see the split between what we would legitimately call the liberal wing of the party and the moderate wing. And it looks like it's going to be a very big victory for the moderate wing tonight.
And that speaking of those two wings, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden couldn't be more different when you look at those candidates on a stage. Do you see a place where the country comes together and there's a clear winner? Is this going to be just a duking it out constantly back and forth?
You know, that's the hope. I like to think of it this way, though. You know, we are a very diverse party. We're a Big Ten, and we need every part of our base to show up. We need the moderate voters to show up. We need the progressive voters to show up. Conventional wisdom and what Democratic establishment would say is that let's go with a moderate candidate, and you progressives, you better come along. And what the progressives are saying is we've been coming along for a long time. John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and we've been coming along. So now it's your turn, now that we've got the momentum on the progressive side, for you to organize moderates and get behind Bernie Sanders. So that will be the battle we will have going into Super Tuesday. I think all the way up to the convention is, will we rally around whoever it is, if that happens to be Bernie Sanders, if that happens to be Joe Biden. I think, you know, speaking for the Progressive Party, and we've had a lot of meetings about this, we have agreed that no matter who the nominee is, if it's Joe Biden, we're there. I think the question is, will we get the agreement from the moderate wing of the party if that happens to be Bernie Sanders who comes out with the most delegates, whether they will rally around him?
As they continue to kind of duke it out on both sides, is this a positive thing for the party, or does this hurt the party in the long run?
I think it rubs both ways. I mean, if you think about right now, we don't have a huge organizing presence coming out of DNC just yet. You know, typically they let the candidates do that. So what you've got is you've got every part of our party getting engaged and organized. We need a big turnout in November. So that's the positive side of this. We got all these candidates who are getting their people, they're getting excited, and we want all of them to show up. I think the negative is if we keep duking it out, and we keep saying Bernie Sanders can't beat Trump, and we keep saying, you know, Joe Biden is too old, he's not ready, then what we have to contend with is coming out of the convention with whoever the person is, battered and bruised, and that we can't get everybody on the same page to support that person. And so I think that's the balance is, yes, let's organize everybody, but let's not do so much damage to both of these candidates or all of these candidates that nobody seems attractive, and then people just stay home, which is our big, big risk. I mean, we have to have huge turnout numbers to beat Trump in November.
And Heidi, Joe Biden has talked about the fact that South Carolina was a place that he was expecting to get recharged in. Are you surprised at what we're seeing tonight, or was this what we were expecting all along?
No, I think that this is something that was predictable and expected, especially with very significant endorsements that he got this month. And so I think it's important to point out that when you look at the plurality, you can say, well, you're the lead on the delegate count, but when you look at how it all shakes out, the real question is going to be, what is the reaction among Senator Klobuchar? What's the reaction among Mayor Pete? How do they respond to very anemic showings in South Carolina, and how does the public respond? Do they begin to coalesce around a moderate candidate so we get a binary choice? You know, when you look at the Hillary Obama primary in 2008, it was binary. When you look at the Sanders Clinton race in 16, it was binary. We're still in that spot where there's a lot of choices, and I think that Super Tuesday will be very, very significant. But a win like this for Joe Biden is going to propel him forward, give him the legitimacy he needs to say, look, I can win the nomination, and I also can be the candidate to take on Trump and to win.
No question, this is still a competition and a lot of unknowns to still be answered. We'll be right back more with your South Carolina primary. Stay with us.
What's the one daytime show people can't get enough of? Drum roll, please.
I watched
this show all the time.
This is my new favorite show.
And Jennifer?
I love it so much.
Strahan, Sarah, and Kiki. Your lunchtime escape on ABC.
Friday nights, 9, 8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9, 8 Central on ABC.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm grateful you woke up this morning.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning, sunshine. We've been waiting for you. Say good morning. Good morning, sunshine. In America. Say good morning. I want you to wake me up.
ABC News, America's #1 news source. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
This is an ABC News election update.
Welcome back. We're here giving you the latest results from the South Carolina primary. Trevor Ault has been looking at how people are voting today and seeing if there are any problems out there. He joins us now live from a filing center in Columbia. How you doing there, Trevor?
We're doing all right, Eva, and so far things seem to be moving relatively smoothly. We weren't expecting any hiccups like what we saw in Iowa, just given the fact that this is a primary compared to a caucus. It's a much more simple system of tallying those votes. But what we've heard from the South Carolina Democratic Party is so far so good in terms of counting the votes. Now, we still do have 45 minutes until those polls close, but the numbers seem to be very good. And the #1 issue that they have seen, if they're seeing any small-scale issue, is some consolidation of polling locations. They got a number of calls, a bit more than 100 calls about people just trying to figure out where they were supposed to vote due to some last-minute changes in polling locations. But in terms of actual problems of getting those results, at least right now, we're not hearing any types of issues in that regard, Eva.
All right. Thank you there, Trevor. And for more on what issues were on the voters' minds today in South Carolina, let's go to our Deputy Political Director, Mary Alice Parks, live from our D.C. Bureau. Let's talk about how people were making their decision in South Carolina. What were the major issues?
Well, like we've seen in other early states, we know that health care continued to dominate the front of mind of voters. But I want to take a look while we're getting in some of these numbers from our early exit polls about just the racial breakdown of the voters in South Carolina, because it really looks like that's where Joe Biden was able to expand some of his just strength in this state. We're seeing that right there. You can see the numbers. Joe Biden really dominating with African-American voters. No one else coming close to those numbers, and African-American voters just making up the bulk of his support. We're going to continue to be talking about this the rest of the night because it is going to be a big part of the story, especially if it looks like it ends up being an incredibly strong night for Joe Biden. We also have some early numbers about just how popular the former vice president is in this state, not only among African-American voters, but among all voters. So we're seeing across the board that all Democratic primary voters really just have a strong, favorable opinion of the former vice president. 75% there really liking him. He's well known in this state. That's what he was telling us and telling voters the last few weeks, that people know him and they like him in this part of the country. And we can see in these early exit polls that the number of African-American voters who have a favorable opinion of him even higher than that 75%. Eva?
All right, yeah, and I think that's the thing that's interesting for people to remember. Joe Biden has a history in the state of South Carolina that extends beyond just being the vice president for Barack Obama. He spent quite a bit of time in that state going back many, many decades.
Absolutely. On the campaign trail, he was quick to talk about senators from that state that he worked closely with over the years from his time in the Senate. And when Clyburn endorsed him, such a powerful moment this last week that really gave him an extra boost in the last few days of this campaign, that is what the House Whip said. Clyburn got up there and said, "I just know Joe Biden. We know him here." And I was in South Carolina just a few days ago, and you could really feel that. People would tell personal stories on the ground of their time with him over the years. Everyone has memories of a hug just like that. And I think that kind of legacy on the ground will likely pay off tonight.
All right. Thank you, Mary Alice. Let's check in now with Devin Dwyer, who's with the Bernie Sanders campaign in Virginia. He joins me now live. And Devin, what is Bernie doing tonight?
Yeah, well, he's going to be coming here to Virginia Beach, Eva, in just about 2 hours from now. He's going to hold a rally here to cap off his day. Then he's off to California, continuing this blitz for Super Tuesday states. But I got to tell you, there is so much on the line for Bernie Sanders tonight. To pick up where Yvette Simpson was talking about a little while ago, the Sanders campaign, coming off their big win in Nevada, has made the ability to build a diverse coalition central to their argument for the nomination. They claim, coming out of Nevada, they were able to win Latinos, African Americans, young people, old people, all the like. Tonight, that will be tested, obviously, in a huge way in South Carolina. We're going to be looking very closely at those African American voter results because not since 1988 has a Democratic nominee for president gotten the nomination and lost the African American vote in South Carolina. It's that big of a deal. It's usually a marker in the sand. So if Joe Biden tonight can have a resounding win, not just in the state of South Carolina, but with African Americans, that could lift him going into the weekend. Not a devastating blow for Bernie Sanders, but something that will be a flashing yellow light for his campaign. But we should say Bernie Sanders had been closing in on Biden in South Carolina. There's a chance, maybe an off chance tonight, that he could pull out a win in South Carolina, and that would be huge, a resounding vindication of his argument that he can build those coalitions. So there is a lot on the line tonight. As Mary Alice has mentioned, we're going to look at that African American number just coming in, but the stakes are very high for the Sanders campaign, and the central argument of their campaign that they can bring all different constituencies of the Democratic Party together.
Yeah, and that number is a number that Joe Biden has pointed to since day one, saying that his road to the nomination went through South Carolina. Zareen Shaw joins us now live from Columbia, South Carolina, where the Biden headquarters is tonight. And Zareen, if Biden wins tonight, it will be historic for him.
Absolutely historic, Eva, because this wouldn't just be his first win in this race in a state, it would be his first win ever in a state. In 1988, he dropped out before Iowa, and then in 2008, he dropped out immediately after Iowa. So it would be a huge win. And just to underscore what a home state advantage Joe Biden has here in the state. He's vacationed here for years. His wife, Jill Biden, said just this week that they are incredibly drawn to the state, that they've come here during some of their most darkest moments. And the people here in this state have just expressed how much they love Joe Biden. Our reporter Johnny Verhoevic has been with him this whole week, actually for this whole last year. But just this week, he met a man who has been following Joe Biden's career since 1975. And he had a pin that he wore today that was from his 1988 race. And also just want to stress what an important endorsement he got from, as you've been talking about, Rep. Jim Clyburn. Just from the exit polls we've seen in just the last little bit, a quarter of people in those exit polls say that it was the most important factor when going into the voting booth. Half of the people said it was an important factor. So we'll keep an eye on all of those polls, and we'll bring you the rest as we see it. Eva?
All right, Zareen, thank you. What can tonight's results tell us as we look towards Super Tuesday? Our ABC consultants, Yvette Simpson and former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, join me now to hash that out. Yvette, I want to just talk about Biden. I mean, we've talked about the fact that South Carolina is basically a second home to him. Yeah. Was that the real advantage that he had here? The time, the Clyburn endorsement, people know him. Both Republicans and Democrats seem pretty friendly towards the former vice president.
And the Obama factor. I mean, people in South Carolina love Obama. You saw the graphic that suggested that 51% want to go back to the Obama times. You heard him kind of throughout the campaign saying, this is going to be the third term of Obama. We're bringing Obama Obama back. And I really think, just to be flippant a little bit, some of these folks think that if he comes back, Obama's coming with him, right? It's like, Obama, we get Obama back, okay, we'll take Joe Biden. And so I think you also have to remember that these are predominantly older black voters who really like security. And so they know what they know. They don't like a whole lot of change. They know what they're going to get. They feel like they can trust him, and that is important. I think it'll be interesting to see how younger black voters who are in South Carolina show up, and if they split for Bernie or if they also go with Biden. And that'll be interesting because there has been a bit of a war when you think about black voters, the race for black voters. We see a lot of older black voters going for Biden, but Bernie has gotten a lot of young black voters who are saying, change is now. We need to be fighting for these policies. We need change now. And so I think that energy, we'll see if that shows up when we start to break down not just race, but the layering of race and age.
He's been skewing a little bit older with the voters who have been supporting him in general. A
little older, but you have to remember that the fail-safe in South Carolina are those folks who fought for the right to vote. They've been voting ever since they've been 18. They've been, since they got the right to vote, if that was 18 or later. And so these are folks who, and the challenge for Bernie too, is that these voters are folks who will show up, meaning older black voters. I mean, I remember in my state of Ohio, a woman who was 90-some years old and said, I have never missed a vote. I will show up, rain, snow, sleet. Those are the kind of voters that you get in South Carolina. They're not feeling well. They're going to make it to the vote because they remember what the fight was like. And so he's I think, benefiting from the fact that folks who normally vote, black people who normally vote in South Carolina, are showing up. Bernie's challenge is, can he get those younger black voters who tend to like the social policies that he is supporting, that he is bringing to the forefront, whether he can get them to show up.
When you start to look at those numbers, Heidi, I want to bring you in here and how it breaks down for Joe Biden, overwhelmingly getting the black vote. And that Clyburn factor that we're seeing there seems to really have helped him out in this last week. Is that the kick he needed today?
I think that, what Yvette just said is that, we're going to have to see how younger black voters showed up and how they performed today, because it was predictable that Joe Biden was going to get the older black vote. I don't think anyone should have ever disputed that. But we also have to put this in the context of the last week. Bernie Sanders had an interview on 60 Minutes where he, presumably supported Castro. Joe Biden had a moment, a beautiful moment, at a town hall where he reached out and really connected on his faith. That's a big issue for a lot of voters in South Carolina, not just African American voters. And so I think you've got to look at this in the context not just of identity politics, but also what were the last events that people thought about when they went to the polls. And I think when you look at Joe Biden's appeal, he's like the comfort blanket. People who are exhausted by the back and forth of the Trump administration, people who see now the Trump administration failing to address a public health crisis in a way that makes us comfortable, or certainly makes the markets comfortable. They're now looking maybe for a little bit of that security in light of what's happened all week. And so whether Vice President Biden can take that momentum and move forward with it into Super Tuesday, he's going to run into something. It's called Bloomberg, because Bloomberg wasn't on the ballot here, and Bloomberg's competing in all the Super Tuesday states with a lot of money and a lot of advertising. And so I think we're in a time when we can't predict, oh, this happened 4 years ago, or this happened 8 years ago, therefore that's the trajectory now. I think we're in a different kind of race now.
Speaking of that Bloomberg factor, Bloomberg pulls those same moderate type voters. Do you think this big win in South Carolina, what looks like it will be a big win, will be enough for him to rise to the top of people's lists in those Super Tuesday states with Bloomberg on the ballot?
Yeah, I think Bloomberg actually has seen some bad polling. He started out, people didn't know who he was. They heard some of the bio, they saw the ads. They liked that he was willing to take on the president in a way that he hasn't been taken on yet. And so I think they thought, well, here's an interesting alternative to Joe Biden. I think after tonight, you may see an even steeper downward turn in the Bloomberg kind of response to this, electoral response to this. But it remains to be seen. I never discount money and politics and television ads that are pretty compelling. So something Joe Biden doesn't have. He went into this primary in South Carolina without a lot of cash on hand. We'll see, he'll get a big bump, I think, in terms of money going forward. But I think that you've got to look at each one of these primary races and now Super Tuesday in the context of what's happening. There won't be a lot of opportunity for reaction because we're going from Saturday night, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday, Super Tuesday voting.
Yeah, and you definitely need money to stay in this race. Let's go back to Zareen Shah. Zareen, you've actually been on the trail with Michael Bloomberg. He's been in those Super Tuesday states. What have his events been like?
His events, you really get the sense, Eva, that this is a billionaire, a multi-billionaire candidate who is hosting some of these events. I mean, they are all catered. Some of them have free-flowing alcohol. And he's not just throwing money. I mean, he's throwing it in a very targeted way. When we were in, for example, Texas, the food was catered exactly to the crowd there. Same with all the other states. So he's using his money in a very specific way. And this is what all the other candidates sort of fear at this very moment. And one thing that voters have told us is that they're so afraid that that Bloomberg's money will actually contribute to kind of splitting up that moderate vote and kind of giving Bernie Sanders that win. Bloomberg himself said in a podcast with The Economist back in September that he wasn't jumping in the race at that moment because he feared that the country was just going way too far left and that he wouldn't be able to kind of stand a chance at that moment. Of course, that changed. He's now in the race, and we'll see what happens with him and his billions of dollars that he's willing to spend potentially on this race.
After getting in the top of the list of the candidates, he came really under fire. A lot of points of his record were made issue, and he was on the debate stage twice. Has that changed the way that the voters at these events that you're going to view him? Are they certain that he's someone that they're going to support, or are they still figuring it out?
You know, so I actually haven't specifically gone to any of his events after those debates. I went to quite a few before, and the momentum there was incredible. They were packed events. Sometimes there were one or two overflow rooms, and a lot of energy. But since that time, of course, we have seen his poll numbers drop, so that is, of course, an indication. And just the vibe that we're getting from his staff, you get the sense that it's really different from before that debate. Eva?
All right, Zareen Shah, thank you so much, and props to you for being able to speak as that mic behind you was squeaking. Thank you so much. And thanks for being with us. We'll be back at the top of the hour as more results come in from South Carolina. Stay with us.
What's the one daytime show people can't get enough of? Drum roll, please.
I watch this show all the time.
This is my new favorite show.
And Jennifer?
I love it so much.
Strahan, Sarah, and Kiki. Your lunchtime escape on ABC.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm grateful you woke up this morning.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning, sunshine. We've been waiting for you.
America's #1 news source. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
Welcome to Around the Table, where undecided voters get to ask their questions. Tonight, we're meeting with Amy Klobuchar for dinner at the Copper Door restaurant in New Hampshire, a state where a successful primary result will be critical to her candidacy.
So I heard you say that you can use federal ability to pay school teachers. How would you do that?
Do you believe in reparations?
ABC News has carefully chosen 3 undecided voters to bring their questions to the table as they decide who will get their vote in the Democratic presidential primary.
The one thing that has been said about you, that you're difficult to work for.
In this moment where there's so much talk about impeachment, as undecided voters, do you guys care about that?
I do.
Yeah.
I absolutely do. I think that the present occupant of the White House is eviscerated how many people feel about themselves and his derogatory statements toward people. And I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about it, and I want to pose a question to you, Senator. Because how people govern and how we treat each other is huge for me. And I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about how we're going through cabinets and how he fires people when they don't agree with him and that we don't have a leadership. And I'm concerned about my next leader. So my question to you is, how are you going to govern? And how are you going to pick people? You have a wonderful bipartisan ability to pass bills, but what I'm concerned about, the one thing that has been said about you, that you're difficult to work for. Because I know when you work for somebody who's difficult, it brings you down. And I'm concerned about that. I'd like you to speak to me about that. I do.
No, it's good. I'm glad you brought it up.
Because when you can do bipartisan work on the floor and get bills, I know that I'm a benefactor of that, and many people are. You are a bipartisan senator. Your record stands for itself.
It does.
But what about your staff? And in February, there was an article in the New York Times, and I do want you to speak to that. Because
no, I'm glad you raised it. So, first of all, I love my staff. There's a bunch of them out there somewhere.
I know.
And one of the reasons we are so successful, it's not me, it's them. And I am tough on people, and you can always be better. And I push some people, and as a result, a few of them didn't like me. But let me finish. But 70 of them wrote a letter with their names on it, where all different people, the schedulers, the people that were my assistants, the chiefs of staff, saying they had a really good experience in our office. So you always have that happen, but for me, the key is having high standards for myself, my staff, and our country.
Your father immigrated from India.
He did.
Wow.
And you don't believe it should be a crime to cross the border?
I don't. I know that's a radical position per se, but I don't. American history is predicated on, I think about Ellis Island, and it's like, okay, if you didn't look sick, you were allowed in because you were coming away from something, right? That's that's what it was. If you're sick, they send you back because you're sick, and if they're otherwise, you're welcome. You're in America now, and so that's kind of that's how we got to where we are. Worked pretty well for a couple hundred years. Why is it becoming so much more difficult now?
Senator, you see it as a crime though to cross the border.
Let me just step back here. I greatly want to actually expand immigration. I want to have a path to citizenship for the 12 million people that are here. So anyway, my argument would be that we need comprehensive immigration reform. For those that care about the debt and the deficit, it was Grover Norquist's #1 priority in 2013. Why? The Congressional Budget Office score, it brought the deficit down by $158 billion. It's even more now. Just passing that because people aren't paying their taxes. They're in a shadow economy. Then you have that money. You can spend some of it on asylum processing and targeted border security. You can spend some of it on helping those Northern Triangle countries so that we don't see this flood of asylum seekers. There are really smart things you can do, but not if all you're trying to do is use immigrants as political pawns.
My kind of tough follow-up question here, and I'm sorry, I don't. But
no, it's fine.
I know. Is that we're in New Hampshire right now, and that this state is 95 or 97% white. I mean, it's a very, very white state. There are not many people of color here. This is a swing state, and it can go for Donald Trump. In a state that's this white, how do you, if people are scared because they're being fed fear by people who are in power, how do you convince those people people they shouldn't be scared if there's nobody of color for them to interact with around them.
Well, I do think they're starting, everywhere they go, there are immigrants that are working in this area. I mean, there are, and there's much more than there were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So I think more and more Americans, as we travel the country, see immigrants as part of our economy.
If you see it as a pressing need, though, where we do need these workers in the Midwest, and like we do want
need them
immigrants coming
everywhere.
in, then yeah, I know. Then why shouldn't we establish an Ellis Island type system where, like, if you want to come here?
Yeah, but you can do it much more smartly if you do it expanding legal immigration.
We have 50% of folks that are actually graduating from four-year universities. So let's talk about the folks that are not graduating. Before we can even get students to the four-year, to the six-year university, what is the campaign doing around ensuring that our students can compete with some of our suburban counterparts?
For me, what you need to do, first of all, if you're really going to make the economy work for everyone, is address that and make sure that we pay our teachers like we should. That's the first thing. And then making sure we're investing in impoverished areas that have consistently had more poverty in their schools. The second thing is, I've worked a lot on truancy. Getting kids interested in school and staying in school in high school. And some
But how do you think we're doing that? Because I look at my district, my population, where 90% of the students, like you mentioned, right, free and reduced lunch.
That's right.
However, the representation of teachers of color are under 20%. But we don't have an increase in pipeline of teachers of color coming into the urban school systems.
Well, you are the model, first of all, training teachers while you are a teacher.
Right.
And I think getting more making sure that teachers are higher paid is going to help. Getting kids so they graduate from high school, and part of this is doing more with these 1- and 2-year degrees while kids are in high school. And that is harder in urban areas sometimes, and it also can be hard in extreme rural areas.
Absolutely.
They have something in common here, because you may not have the community college right down the street in either place. So it's getting the kids to the community college, to apprenticeships, so they're interested in work or a field right away, and it motivates them to want to graduate. And that's on us, because we need these workers to fill jobs in our economy. That's why I'm in favor of 1- and 2-year free college.
And a Boston report just came out. The Boston Herald produced this report. It's called Racism, Image, and Reality. And they talked about our elite institutions and how they're only letting in 3% of students from that urban district into some of their schools. That can be replicated all around the nation. When you look at New York, how many folks are going to NYU? How many folks are going to Columbia? Right? And I get the 2-year, because every kid's not built for 4, every kid's not built. But it's like,
but you got to make sure that
those are options. Those are, you are in the backyard of our
you don't want
public school
to track
systems.
kids. I agree, but I'm talking about this for all. Believe me, there's a lot of there's a lot of kids in rural areas as well that could be served by doing a 1- or 2-year degree. I just want to make it work for the kids that need it the most, which are the kids she's teaching, and then make it work for kids in rural areas that have different needs, and we've got to make sure they're also going into areas as much as we can that they want to do, but that are going to make them have gainful employment.
I'm a firm believer that people will take the jobs that are higher paying. So what college professors are able to get paid exorbitantly more than a public school teacher, even though they work the same schedule. So I heard you say that you can use federal ability to pay school teachers. How would you do that?
You just supplement what the states are paying. Right now the states pay most. They'll continue to do that. You'll have local governments, but you want to help supplement on the federal level, because it should be a value of our country.
Do you plan to add a new federal tax for that?
I'll tell you how I'm going to pay for a bunch of these things. The Republican tax bill, I know you were a Republican, and you're independent.
I'm enrolled in Massachusetts right now.
I don't know. I don't know where I stand. I've got a lot of independent and moderate Republican support over the years. So the corporate tax rate, which I think should have come down, went down way too low. It went down to 21%. Every point it went down was $100 billion. So if you even go up to 25 or say 28%, it gives you $400 billion more, $800 billion more. The way they did the international tax rate, you could gain $150 billion just by going back to how it was before. The hedge fund loophole, $14 billion for that, for hedge fund managers. Oil subsidies, tens of billions of dollars right there. And I know the public is with us on this. It's just my job to make the case.
But how do you make that argument in this current environment where Republicans and the president will say the economy's never been better, unemployment's never been lower, if it ain't broke, don't fix it?
Okay, I'd ask these guys, because he's taking care of his grandma right now in his own place. She's got a bunch of kids that she wants to get to be gainfully employed that have all kinds of obstacles. And she's got a bunch of kids herself, 3 kids, that have student loan debt. Okay, so it's not working for everyone, number one, and we have to make it work better for everyone.
I'm very concerned about healthcare and the present costs and the upcoming costs. And I know for myself, as a healthcare provider, it was very difficult to sit down with your patients at discharge time, and we're often telling people what to do in healthcare. We're telling them what to do. You need to do this, you need to do this, and we're assigning them, these are the prescriptions that you want to take. But they can't afford them.
Right.
So they leave, and they often fail because they can't afford their drugs. So we can talk about, let's talk about big pharma and affordable health care, and not so much health care, but affordable drugs, really.
The pharma crisis is just completely out of control for a good reason, and that's because nothing has happened. We literally have 2 pharma lobbyists for every member of Congress. Those are the numbers right now. So if you wonder why nothing's happened, there is a law that says that Medicare can negotiate for better prices.
That's right.
That they're stuck in. And that's not true for Medicaid or for the VA. So I've been leading the bill, and as president I could get it done, where you unleash the power of 43 million seniors, which wouldn't just help those seniors, it would help everyone to start negotiating better prices. That's the first. The second is to bring in less expensive drugs when there's no competition or just period from safe countries like Canada. So creating some competition to bring down the prices. Right now, big pharma pays off generics to keep their products off the market. And so generic drug companies get the money. Big pharma gets no competition, and we get stuck with the bill. And so stopping that practice.
Universal health care.
Well, I think we should move to universal health care.
That was my
and
question,
make things
Senator.
more affordable. And there's just a lot of different ideas on how to get there. We got to start with President Obama's Affordable Care Act, but that's just the beginning. It's not an end. And there are many ways you can get there. We're having a debate in the Democratic Party, if you didn't notice, about how to get there. And I like the idea of a public option because it allows people to, it creates a competitive alternative to private insurance, but people can still keep their own private insurance.
Which is important.
And so, because that's 149 million Americans. And then doing something about long-term care, which is just the elephant in the room that no one's dealing with, to make it easier to get long-term care insurance. We're having a doubling of our senior population.
That's right.
I'm currently dealing with that with my grandmother, actually.
Yes.
But a question just
And where is she?
piggybacking
Is
off
she
that.
in?
She's actually living in my house right now because she's not doing
Okay,
so
you
well.
are. Did you see when he said he was dealing with it? It's in your house.
Yeah, no, literally,
Okay, that
She
is
actually,
so nice
she
of
was
you.
released from an outpatient rehab facility on Friday. So she's
helping
in the
to
system
take care of
currently.
it.
Yeah,
That's really.
But piggybacking off that, I've always liked your messaging on like expanding Obamacare or working with what we currently have. Why do you think, like in the Democratic Party right now, it seems like it's more popular to rip it all down and start over? Why does that seem to be the messaging that's most popular?
I think people are so frustrated with the costs, and so, and this has always been something that's considered out there, the idea of just starting over with Medicare for all. So my argument would be, we can look at everything, but we've got to start somewhere. And the way you start is by allowing other people to buy into Medicaid or Medicare.
Let's talk about gun control.
Okay. So
you're from a rural area, and as I am as well, and people where I live, they hunt, but I know we need an assault weapon ban. So could you speak to gun control?
Yeah.
And I could preface it with, this is going back to doing my research, not trying to take your job. So.
It's like become irrelevant.
Food taster now.
Pretty good spot to do this.
Leah got her notes.
I'm like, I have to come prepared with my research. So just this summer alone, right?
You might be a teacher.
26 mass shootings, left 126 people dead. Mass killings where folks are talking about they were inspired by some of the bigotry, the prejudice regarding some of Trump's, right? We look at Dayton, Ohio. We look at El Paso, which folks are saying motivated by hatred of Hispanic people. So I am interested, that this is not a black issue, this is not a white issue, this is not a Muslim issue, this is not a white issue again, but this is an American homegrown issue. So what are we doing about mass shootings? What are we doing about AR and AK style guns?
When I was a prosecutor, we would have horrific crimes every day, street violence, gun violence. And we tried to get that assault weapon ban reinstated on a local level. Out in Washington, it didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
Then I got to Washington, and these horrible mass shootings, including Sandy Hook. Still my saddest day, having those families in my office and telling them that they had the courage to come in the names of their babies they lost to fight for something that actually wouldn't have saved their babies but saved the most lives. That was universal background checks, which really helps with domestic violence cases and suicides. And we had to tell them there weren't enough courageous votes in the U.S. Senate to pass it. Then Parkland happened, and that changed everything.
Yeah,
because
told Trump that it is okay to arm teachers with guns walking.
All right, but guess who got the provision in the bill for school safety that said you can't arm teachers?
Good job.
Okay, so, but what changed? Not Donald Trump. I was in the White House sitting across from him at a table exactly like this when he said 9 times that he wanted to pass universal background checks. And I wrote it down. I had a piece of paper sitting next to the vice president because of the work I've done on guns. And I have that piece of paper still with hash marks. He didn't do it. He met with the NRA the next day and he folded. So he's not changing, but what is changing is the people. They are. The majority of hunters at least want the universal background check.
Yes, they do.
Majority of Trump voters want universal background checks. And so there has been a sea change, and it's ever since those kids stood up, and then kids across the country, it's kind of like gay marriage. Kids across the country started talking to their dads, their grandpas, their moms, hunting rural areas, and it changed the issue. And that was in part why we took back the House of Representatives and why they passed these bills. I think we should have an assault weapon ban, and I think we should have a magazine limit ban.
Absolutely.
And the best example of all these horrific shootings of that was Dayton, Ohio. In 1 minute, the cops got there and gunned that guy down. In 30 seconds of that 1 minute, he killed 9 people because he had the high-capacity magazine. So I think the public's had it. And once again, he thought public opinion would go against him on it. I think public will stick on this one. And so that's part of the reason why I don't want to just win, but I want to win big.
So my last question is that I'm a black woman in America first, right? I have not had the opportunity or fortunate to have the opportunity to benefit from generational wealth. Do you believe in reparations?
Yes, I'm on the bill to set up this commission, which is the bill. I believe in this bill, which is to set up the commission to figure out how we can do this, that there has to be a way to help people that have been so hurt from the discrimination of the past. It may not be individual checks. It may be that we are investing in areas that have been perpetually impoverished because of this. And what this bill is, it's Senator Booker is leading it in the Senate. Sheila Jackson Lee is leading it in the House. And what it is it looks at what would be the best way to work on this, and that is what I think we need to do.
My last question would be, if tomorrow was your first day of work in the White House, what would be the first thing that you would do?
Well, the first thing I would do is not send one mean tweet. And then people that would be in his job would not know what to do. They'd have to go back to sleep. It would create a whole new world.
What would be your
first thing to do would be, I have laid out over 100 things you can do in the first 100 days. First thing I would do is sign us back into the International Climate Change Agreement. You can do that without Congress, and you can do it legally. I think it actually, instead of just seeing everything in such a negative way right now, which is so easy to do, seeing this as this incredible opportunity for our country to come back as one team. That's why I've always said I want to be the president not for half of America, but all of America. And that America is at this table right now.
During this meal, certainly we've seen your smarts, your passion, your heart. But it's October, and you're still way behind in polls and in fundraising. Why?
I'm not that behind. I have money in the bank. I'm running ads right now in New Hampshire and in Iowa. And I am not someone that has come from a big state that's run for president before. But neither did Bill Clinton or Jimmy Carter. It is a crowded field. I look at it as the glass half full, and that is that I'm ahead of 18 people that have been or were in the field and continue to make the bars, to make the debate stage and other things. So that's what I'm doing. And I just think that someone, you know, we already got the loudest voice in the room, and that guy's in the White House. I don't think that's what people want. I think they're tired of the noise and the nonsense and the extremes. They want to find someone who actually wants to get things done and have their back and tell the truth. So it's on me in these next 3-4 months to get that out there to people, which is why we're here today. I wish every meal was like this.
The most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Can you tell us your full name for the record? Jeffrey Edward Epstein.
Every girl that meets Jeffrey starts off with giving him a massage. He's like, I'll pay you $200 for every girl that you bring to me.
Who else was underage?
All of them.
All of them?
He told me the younger the better.
How did he get so rich? How did he get away with it for so long? And what do the women who survived his crimes now have to say? Truth and Lies, Jeffrey Epstein. Listen free now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. ABC News, honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice.
Breaking news, context, analysis.
And no shouting. The time is now for ABC News Live.
Get it streaming everywhere, right to you.
Today in America, the way we choose presidential nominees is by having voters go to the polls and weigh in on who they want their party's candidate to be. But there's a theory called the party decides that says behind the scenes, the parties are actually pulling the strings and determining who the party's nominee will be. Today, we're going to check out whether or not that theory holds up looking at historic elections. As we discussed in the last episode, the system that we have today, where voters choose presidential candidates, began in the 70s. Back then, there's reason to believe that the parties weren't doing the deciding, in large part because they didn't know how to exert their power. At the time, Republicans were running incumbents, so they didn't have much deciding to do anyway. On the Democratic side, however, the party apparatus wasn't particularly keen on either of the candidates who ended up winning the nomination that decade. The first was South Dakota Senator George McGovern, who faced an anybody but McGovern campaign that year. The second was Jimmy Carter.
You got a mighty fine product.
When he ran for re-election, Senator Ted Kennedy from his own party ran a primary campaign against him.
Tell the President of the United States what I had expressed on television the other evening, and that is I have every intention of continuing in this campaign as a candidate.
So in the 70s, the parties were clearly not deciding. But that doesn't mean, however, that the theory is altogether bunk. Throughout the 70s, the parties were learning how this new process worked. And by the 80s, they could play the system. In other words, use money and influence to get their preferred candidates nominated. So how can we tell whether or not this is happening if it's all behind the scenes? One way is by looking at party endorsements heading into the Iowa caucuses, the first contest in the nation. And the data shows that from the 80s through the early 2000s, any candidate who entered the Iowa caucus with a clear lead in party endorsements went on to win that party's nomination. A prime example of this is the 2000 election between Vice President Al Gore and Governor of Texas George Bush. Both parties clearly lined up behind those two candidates, gave them resources, and in the actual primary, Al Gore went on to win every single nominating contest, and George Bush won 44 of them. Things changed, though, in the elections since 2000, importantly with regards to the internet and fundraising. The 2004 election is a good example, with Howard Dean running for the Democratic nomination. Howard Dean appealed to voters on the internet and was able to fundraise through the internet as well. And so he didn't have to rely as heavily on the normal sources of support like the party or the mainstream media in order to begin to gain traction. In fact, he ran against the party as part of his primary campaign.
And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House!
So Howard Dean did not go on to win the nomination in 2004, but his campaign showed that there were cracks forming in this party decides model. The next couple elections revealed some vulnerabilities in the theory as well. For example, in 2008, going into Iowa, Hillary Clinton was the leader in endorsements, but Barack Obama won the nomination. That said, Obama was well respected among party insiders and did already have some endorsements. But then, in 2016, on the Republican side, the party decides model completely fell apart. It's hard to remember now, but when Donald Trump got into the Republican primary, he didn't have any party support. Not a single member of Congress endorsed his campaign for 8 months. And it wasn't until after he had already won multiple primaries that he got his first congressional endorsement. All that didn't matter, though. The party wasn't able to decide. Donald Trump got about 30% of support in initial primaries, and that was enough to win him the Republican Party nomination without almost any support from the party. All of this is to say that the party can decide under a certain set of circumstances, and did decide for about 2 decades. But given today's environment, when candidates can appeal to voters and fundraise in unconventional ways, the party doesn't seem to be able to necessarily decide. President Trump is a great example of that. We'll see what happens on the Democratic side in 2020.
This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, I'm grateful you woke up this morning.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning, sunshine. We've been waiting for you. Say good morning. Good morning, sunshine. In America. Say good morning. I want you to wake me up.
The time is now for ABC News Live.
Get it streaming everywhere, right to you.
This is an ABC News election update. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good evening. We are coming on the air now with breaking news in the race for the White House. ABC News projects that Joe Biden will win today's Democratic primary in the state of South Carolina. It's his first win of the 2020 campaign after lagging behind in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada, the first primary contest the former vice president has ever won, and this is his third run for president. And it is a commanding win, thanks to overwhelming support from African-American voters who make up more than half of the Democratic primary electorate in South Carolina. Rachel Scott is in Columbia, where Biden will celebrate tonight. Rachel.
This victory is at full.
George, this was the most critical test yet for Joe Biden. He called this state his firewall, and he was really counting on South Carolina for a comeback, hoping that a big victory here would launch his campaign into Super Tuesday. With just a few days to go, though, Biden still lacks the resources and the funding to match some of his rivals, George.
Rachel Scott, thanks. Of course, then the big questions now, how much of a boost will Biden get heading into Super Tuesday? Will this win blunt the momentum of Bernie Sanders, or will his delegate lead be all but insurmountable after Tuesday night? How much pressure will all of the other candidates get to drop out of this race? And a big X factor, Michael Bloomberg and his billions. Terry Moran is in Charleston for us tonight. And Terry, one thing Biden's win does guarantee is that this Democratic battle is going to go on for some time.
It sure looks that way tonight. These results will put wind in Biden's sail and money in his pockets, which he desperately needs. Those other candidates now sense there's a lot of opportunity in this race. Still, they aren't going to drop out. And Bernie Sanders, while he still has that organization, armies of young supporters, looks much less formidable after a tie with Pete Buttigieg, a tepid win in his neighboring state, a win in Nevada, but getting smashed here by Joe Biden. Fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be a long race.
Right, but he does have the biggest organization going into Tuesday. Tara Moran, thanks. We're going to cover all the action all through the night on Super Tuesday, starting at 8 Eastern. For now, we do return to our regular programs. The big news tonight, Joe Biden wins the Democratic primary in South Carolina. That coverage continues on ABC News Live, and I'll be interviewing both Biden and Bernie Sanders tomorrow on This Week. Have a good night.
And we continue our coverage of the South Carolina primary. Let's go to Zareen Shaw, who is with the Biden campaign. You heard George talk about the fact that this was a historic night for Biden, not just because he was winning tonight. This is actually the first state he has ever won in the primary as he was running for president in 3 tries.
Yeah, Eva, you can really feel the energy in this room. Just a few minutes ago, they showed it on the screen that Joe Biden was a projected winner tonight, and the crowd went wild. A lot of cheering, a lot of enthusiasm. The music behind me is blaring. And let me tell you, that very first song they played was Ain't No Stopping Us Now. That is exactly how their campaign feels right now. And let me tell you, that song is also from the 1970s. And that is when many of these voters actually remember Joe Biden from. One voter said he remembers him from 1975. He was wearing a Joe Biden pin from 1988. They really love him here in this state. Now, I actually went down there just a bit ago. I spoke to some of these people who were out here at this rally. They said they don't just want Joe Biden to win tonight. They want a double-digit lead in order for them to feel confident about him going forward. Our Johnny Verhoeven caught up with Joe Biden earlier today. Reporters asked him this very question: how much does he feel he needs to win by? Now, he would not give a number, but he said the bigger the win, the bigger the bump going into Super Tuesday. Eva?
Yeah, Zareen, he has told me multiple times plenty, and that is all the number he would give us as far as how much he thought he needed to win by. I do want to ask you, though, how much do you think the Clyburn factor played a part into his performance tonight?
It was absolutely huge. Jim Clyburn is referred to as the kingmaker in the state. And just looking at those exit polls, a quarter of people said it was the most important factor going into those polling booths. About half the people said that it was an important factor. Eva?
All right, Zareen Shaw for us there at the Biden campaign headquarters tonight. Let's turn now to who had been the front runner in this race, Bernie Sanders. Devin Dyer is with the Sanders campaign in Virginia. And I think it's interesting to note, Devin, that Sanders is not in South Carolina tonight. It seems his campaign knew that Biden was going to win South Carolina.
That's right, and he made no mention today, Eva, at his 2 previous events of the South Carolina primary at all. In fact, he began the day up in Boston on Elizabeth Warren's home turf in the state of Massachusetts, one of the Super Tuesday states. He drew a huge crowd there, 13,000. Was up in Northern Virginia a few hours ago, another 10,000 crowd turning out for him. We're in Virginia Beach at Virginia Wesleyan University. You see the students gathering behind me, and they let out an audible groan just a few minutes ago when projection was put on the screen that Joe Biden would in fact win the South Carolina primary. But people here not particularly bothered by this. Neither is the campaign. They have been focused on Tuesday, the big delegate sweep headed into this primary season. So few have been awarded so far. And all eyes tonight will be on that margin. How big a win Joe Biden has in South Carolina will dictate a lot how this Sanders campaign feels about things going forward.
And Devin, they've really talked a lot, the Sanders campaign, about building a coalition of people that spans generations, multiple races. When you look at the voter turnout and who's voting, does this pose a problem for the Sanders campaign going forward?
Well, one of the big problems is going to be to keep the diversity of their coalition and expanding the electorate, as Bernie Sanders says he needs to do. In fact, if you look at the early contests so far, Eva, voter turnout there really hasn't been a Sanders surge in voters. There hasn't been a huge draw of people into the campaign, despite some of his rhetoric. The numbers just don't bear it out, at least not yet. And so as this campaign goes forward, he's going to need to build on that, bring more people into the party. He talks about doing it. We haven't seen it in the numbers so far in several of these states. And of course, with African-American voters, that critical voting bloc for the Democratic primary. Tonight, we'll see in South Carolina just how well or poorly he did with that constituency. Obviously, he struggled 4 years ago. Joe Biden, very strong there. But again, the margins in these numbers as the results start to come in will be very telling about just how uphill a fight this will be for Sanders and some of his rivals.
No question, it is definitely still a competition. Let's turn now to Rick Klein, our political director. And Rick, looking at these numbers, what are the things that you're taking away? What are the things that you're eyeing tonight?
Well, Eva, if this is as big a night as it would appear to be for Joe Biden, it is the anatomy of a blowout, and it is a blowout that comes with strength across groups. And I'm really struck by this, the favorability among the candidates. Obviously, these are Democratic primary voters, so you'd expect all of them to be viewed fairly strongly. But the enormous numbers that you see behind Joe Biden, the favorability that he is receiving from voters is just off the charts. I mean, that is a big number, and that comes with a lot of work and a lot of time over a lot of years of working in the state to get to anything like that. Then if you look at this by race, look at how Joe Biden was able to break down the barriers to his candidacy by race by appealing to African-American voters. That is a very big number that he was able to achieve, right, based on, again, a lot of years. You heard him talk about the Obama coalition, about his good friend Barack Obama, time and again on the campaign trail in South Carolina. And you see that pay off with the big margins that he was able to come back with. When you break it down a little bit more by inside the votes, you get to see the strength of the Biden coalition across demographic groups. I'm also struck, if we can move forward to the question about whether people think that we should return to Obama policies or favor more liberal or conservative policies. This is a hot button issue, and of course it's key to the Bernie Sanders campaign, the Elizabeth Warren campaign, who see a future that's a lot more progressive. You're seeing overwhelming support in South Carolina for a return to Obama-era policies. That's a very big deal, and it suggests that as we move to more diverse states, there's more affection for Barack Obama and for his policies. That's what Joe Biden, of course, tapped into. But even among liberal voters, as you can see on the screen, a lot of strength for Joe Biden. He was winning even among self-described liberals. That you would expect to be the Bernie Sanders wheelhouse. And of course, the fact that Biden is able to do that suggests that he is being able to more broadly appeal. And then if you look at the age of voters, now we know that Bernie Sanders is strong among younger voters, but look how competitive Joe Biden was able to be among those voters between 17 and 44. When you go to the 45-plus crowd, that is where Joe Biden's blowout begins. And the numbers that he racked up, when you move forward to Super Tuesday and beyond, you're more likely to see older voters as part of the process. And all of that, Joe Biden is able to say he is the candidate that's able to stitch together those coalitions. So it looks like a resounding victory for Joe Biden, really cut across demographic, geographic, and ideological barriers, Eva.
And Rick, we've been talking about Joe Biden since the start. He said South Carolina was the place for him. It was his firewall. He thought he had to do well in South Carolina. He was counting on South Carolina. But those numbers sort of wavered in the weeks leading up to this primary. How much do you think that Clyburn factor, having the endorsement of arguably the most prominent politician in the state of South Carolina, was for him in that last hour?
Yeah, Eva, we knew it was a big deal, but even that said, we didn't recognize how big a deal it was until we asked it in the exit poll. And about a quarter of voters said it was a major factor. About a quarter of voters said it was somewhat of a factor. So basically about half of Democratic primary voters in South Carolina said that it had something to do with their decision. That endorsement was rolled out just Wednesday of this week, the morning after the debate. There wasn't a lot of question as to who Jim Clyburn would endorse, but the power of that endorsement, and I'll tell you, the Biden campaign has already announced Jim Jacqueline Clyburn will be on the campaign trail with the vice president in North Carolina, nearby North Carolina, which happens to vote in just 3 short days, Eva.
All right, Rick Kleinforth, thank you so much. No surprise that Biden would do well in South Carolina. Let's bring in ABC News contributor and former Senator Heidi Heitkamp. I want to look at the spread, the number by which he potentially will win by tonight. Is it enough to give him the bump that he needs going into those Super Tuesday states where he's spent hardly any money at all because he simply didn't have it?
Well, it's certainly better than having a lower number, and I think it's really hard in this cycle, given that we aren't seeing a binary choice, to see whether one swinger to one candidate or the other candidate. You could see a 5-way race in California as a result of this. Who knows what's going to happen? But I will tell you, tonight, the Biden camp is very, very happy because they have cauterized a wound that they couldn't win a primary. They can make an argument potentially that they now are winning the popular vote because this was a primary and presumably pretty well attended primary compared to a caucus in Nevada or a caucus in Iowa. And I think that Joe Biden when you win a race like this, you gain confidence. You begin to feel better about being out there. You get energized by it, and I think that energy is going to carry through Tuesday. So this is a really good night for the vice president. Now, with that said, the X factor really is Bloomberg. And I think the real question is, what do the candidates who don't do well, who don't get one delegate out of South Carolina, how do they explain that, and how do they continue to make the case that they should get votes on Tuesday?
Yeah, and Heidi, does this put pressure on those candidates to start thinking about if their campaign should continue going forward?
I think that what it does is it's psychological for Super Tuesday voters. They see this, they see the choice narrowing down. Like I said, maybe they're still thinking that people didn't have a chance to test Bloomberg. But when you look at it, they're narrowing down those choices and they're saying, look, it's now time for me to pick between Senator Sanders or Joe Biden. And I'm not going to vote for, one of the candidates that haven't done as well in these primaries because I want my vote to matter, or I don't believe that's the direction the party should go. And I've said, this wasn't a particularly good week for Senator Sanders, and for the first time he's really being vetted like he hasn't been vetted before, and I think you're seeing some of that reaction. Obviously, Joe Biden's been around a long time. He's been vice president for 8 years. People feel like they know him. They call him Joe. He's got that affect that makes people want to join with him. And I think that if this comes down to a binary choice, I'm not sure that's good for Senator Sanders, who so far hasn't been able to broaden his appeal into the broader Democratic base.
In South Carolina, Joe Biden clearly has a lot of history in that state. It's as close to a second home as he could possibly have in South Carolina, the relationships that he has. But when you look at the numbers, you heard Rick talking about the demographic of ages. We know Joe Biden does well with older voters. Is he doing well enough with those younger voters as he heads into the Super Tuesday states, or is that going to be something they're going to need to start focusing on?
Well, I'm telling you, if you're a candidate and you're doing really well with younger voters who are in the past very unreliable voters, or you're doing better with senior citizens and people in that 45 range, you always want to do well in that demographic because they're much more reliable voters. And so unless Senator Sanders can really ignite the youth vote, which I have no doubt that he can in the next 2 days and carry that through the next round of primaries, I think he's going to have a harder time making an argument for why he should be the nominee of the Democratic Party.
All right, Heidi Heitkamp, thank you so much for your analysis. Let's go now to Columbia, South Carolina, and Trevor Alt, who is at the filing center there. How's it going, Trevor?
It's going very smoothly so far, Eva, and what we're seeing based from party officials right now, the early indications is that this was a really strong turnout here in South Carolina. The firm numbers that we have to go off of right now are absentee ballots, and party officials tell us 80,000 of them, more than 80,000, were turned in compared to 2016 when it was just 54,000. That's almost a 50% spike since the last presidential primary here in South Carolina, and that historically indicates a very strong turnout overall. Party officials are saying that this year could rival the state turnout that they saw in 2008, Barack Obama's first year running, which was the most that South Carolina ever got in a primary. They were very excited about what appears to be a very high turnout. And it does add sort of an extra layer of intrigue, because typically high voter turnout means a much more younger turnout and maybe a much more progressive turnout as well, that you would think would favor very strongly Bernie Sanders. But that's not necessarily what we're seeing in these exit polls. But I suppose it does make a little bit of sense that when you have voter turnout that could rival that record turnout under President Barack Obama, it's fitting that the victor, it appears to be Barack Obama's vice president, Joe Biden. Eva.
And Trevor, President Trump was actually in South Carolina this week holding a rally. It's what he's been doing in every state leading into the primary caucus in that state. He had something to say about the primary tonight.
Yeah, and he's done this a few times. He did this in New Hampshire, too. He does the rally ahead of time. He also had one in Nevada, but he will specifically almost encourage his supporters, who are Republicans, to go out and vote in the Democratic primary, because he was running unchallenged or is not worried about losing that race with the Republicans. And there's some debate about the ethics of that, but it's something that the Democratic Party was monitoring today, whether or not possible Trump supporters were going to be voting, or if they were doing that leading up to this race. They told us, based only so far on those absentee ballots that they've got and they counted, they actually went back and looked to see, of the 80,000 absentee ballots that they got, how many of them have voted in multiple Republican primaries in the past, which they thought maybe would be an indicator that they weren't actually Democratic voters, but were trying to put their thumbprints on the Democratic primary here. They said only about 2,500 of those, of the 80,000, had voted in multiple Republican primaries, and presumably a lot of those maybe have flipped parties too. So they didn't think that that would be a problem. But even so, Eva, when President Trump mentioned his supporters voting in the Democratic Party, he took a poll around the arena of vote for the weakest candidate. Who do you think that is? And they overwhelmingly said Bernie Sanders. And I think what we're seeing from these preliminary polls and the exit polls is it doesn't look like Senator Bernie Sanders got that extra lift too. So the Democratic Party here not really concerned about those instructions, and it just looks like a very strong turnout, and a strong turnout for Joe Biden.
And clearly the checks and balances in place there to make sure that there's nothing weird going on with the votes as they come in tonight, correct?
Yeah, everything seems to be going fine. I mean, everybody's a little bit on edge ahead of every state vote just because of what we saw in Iowa. Primaries are much more straightforward, and there hasn't been any significant hiccups or anything that they weren't really prepared for already here in South Carolina. From what we're seeing already, with the fact that we could call the race right away, to the fact that there hasn't been any enormous issues or any problems with the reporting that we have heard from the South Carolina Democratic Party, everything seems to be running very smoothly in that regard.
All right, Trevor All, thank you so much. Let's go to Rick Klein, our political director. And just curious, I mean, with this number coming out for Biden tonight, even if it's a big bump, is it enough? Because he hasn't had the money to spend the time or the dollars on advertising in the Super Tuesday states. Is a bump off of a big win going to be enough to get those people to vote for him in just a matter of days?
Yeah, Eva, a bit of a reality check. Almost certainly Bernie Sanders is going to be the delegate leader at the end of the night tonight, and almost certainly he is going to pad that delegate lead just 3 days from now on Super Tuesday, when there are 15 contests spread across 14 states. The states including the largest delegate prize on the board anywhere, California, where Bernie Sanders is heavily favored, and Texas, where Joe Biden hopes to be competitive, but where, again, Sanders is favored. So that window of only 3 days is actually shorter than it looks, because early voting's been going on in a bunch of those states, including California for weeks now. So Bernie Sanders has been able to presumably begin to bank some votes even before this last-minute surge. I'll tell you, I've been talking to the Biden campaign about their strategy from here. They view the map on Super Tuesday as okay. Not great, but okay. They're looking at states like North Carolina, Arkansas, Virginia, Tennessee. Texas is a possibility as well. Those are all places that they hope that they can bring some last-minute investments. Their super PAC, their outside group, has been spending money for them. And looking at that list of states, there's a chance that if he wins a couple of them, including some big ones like a Virginia and a North Carolina, maybe even a Texas, that is a much different kind of night than we have been expecting around Super Tuesday. Joe Biden is going to get a surge in media attention. He's going to get a surge in donations. The big signal that his campaign is not just not over, but maybe stronger than ever with a resounding victory. They need the momentum to continue. And I'll tell you another concern, Eva, is that there may just be too many candidates in the race on Super Tuesday and beyond. We know right now it was a 7-candidate field today. We will still have at least that many candidates on Tuesday unless someone drops out, with the addition on Tuesday of Michael Bloomberg. A bunch of smart political observers that I've been talking to have been looking at the numbers for Tom Steyer, who's likely to register somewhere maybe in the low single digits in support today. Those are numbers that might otherwise have gone to Joe Biden. That dynamic goes on steroids when Michael Bloomberg is on the ballot everywhere starting on Super Tuesday. So the concern in Biden world is that, yes, you've been able to tap into this sentiment that the party does not ready to coalesce around Bernie Sanders. Yes, you can tap into the residual support for Joe Biden, but it is still going to be splintered a whole bunch of ways just a few days from now.
And speaking of that Bloomberg factor, let's bring in our contributor, Yvette Simpson. And Yvette, how do you even begin to compete against a man who doesn't have a bottom to his pocketbook?
It's really challenging, not just because he's putting so much money in ads, hundreds of millions of dollars, but he has an organizing core across all of the states that we're going to see on Tuesday. We don't know how they're doing on doors, how they're doing on calls. They're a very, I think, enthusiastic group. They are well paid. They are getting all the amenities. And so we just don't know how that's going to penetrate. What we know is that the debate stage is not his friend. He dropped 30 points among moderate voters after his debate performance. So it'll be interesting to see whether the money will be enough to counteract all of the negativity he's getting from one debate stage, but also criticism of his previous policies.
You heard Rick mention this idea that there's so many candidates, it sort of splinters the vote amongst the moderates. Right. At what point will there be pressure for those candidates to drop out? You hear him say people will stay in through Super Tuesday. Is there any chance we'll see someone drop out after tonight, just unable to keep going because they're just not getting the numbers?
It really depends on the money, right? You think about Amy Klobuchar, who we are all still so surprised she's in this race, right? She spread her money, you know, could have put it in the early state. She held on to it. We know she wants to stay in this race. Her state, Minnesota, is a Super Tuesday state. If she wins that state, which is still debatable, she might say, hey, I can get the middle of America. Let me stay in. I think a lot of the folks in this contest find that if they have any delegates, staying in gives them a great advantage if we have a splintered convention, because then they can use those delegates as leverage or bargaining power to get what they want. And so at this point, I don't know that anyone, Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar, has the incentive to get out because they continue to believe that they will do well in rural places, in suburban places, in middle, small town America. And so we'll see if they are influenced to get out. But I will tell you, I don't expect either one of them to do very well here. And after a not so great finish in Nevada, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on both of them in particular to get out of the race.
Every time you think it's going to narrow down, it completely blows wide open. What are the odds that we have a contested convention this year?
You know, I think it's very likely. We expect that Bernie Sanders will come out with a plurality of the delegates, but as you know, if Joe Biden's lead, translates to places like Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama, parts of Florida, he might be able to get enough momentum to be able to take votes away from Bernie Sanders. And if Bernie Sanders goes into the convention without a majority, we know we're going to go to the second ballot, and that's when things get really, really messy. So we'll see how that happens. The more folks in the race, the more likely we have a splinter convention and may come out with maybe a nominee, unfortunately, who does not have the most pledged delegates at that point going in.
Joe Biden has been pointing to South Carolina since the very beginning, said that's where it's going to happen. I need South Carolina for my campaign. Did he deliver in the state that he called his firewall?
I think he did. I mean, nobody expected he would lose. I think in the last few weeks we've been seeing Bernie Sanders close in, got as close as 5 points. That was when Jim Clyburn came to the rescue. And a name like Jim Clyburn in the state of South Carolina means a lot. The question is, does he have that same surrogate? Does he have the same type of energy in some of these other states? Because, you know, Virginia is a very diverse state. They have a lot of younger voters in Virginia. Georgia, who I didn't mention earlier, a lot of older black voters, but still a lot of younger voters. And so the question is there a Jim Clyburn in some of those states that he needs to win that will put their name and their machine and their resources behind him? We will see.
All right, thank you so much, Yvette Simpson. And I just want to read you the tweet from Joe Biden tonight, if we can take a look at it now. Thank you, South Carolina, to all those who have been knocked down, counted out, and left behind. This is your campaign. Together, we will win this nomination and beat Donald Trump. Eva Pilgrim here in New York for you. We will have continuing coverage of the South Carolina primary and the 2020 election on our website, ABC News Live, abcnews.com. For now, good night.
What's the one daytime show people can't get enough of? Drum roll, please.
I watch this show all the time.
This is my new favorite show. And Jennifer?
I love it so much.
Strahan, Sarah, and Kiki. Your lunchtime escape on ABC.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
The world may feel out of your control, but your happiness doesn't have to be. Learn the secrets to happiness. Listen to the 10% Happier podcast, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News honored winner of 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards, including the most prestigious honor, Overall Excellence in Television. ABC News, America's #1 news choice. This is what being live is all about. This is ABC News Live, the 24/7 streaming news source from ABC News. Breaking news, live events, streaming nonstop. Original breakthrough storytelling from ABC News, National Geographic, ESPN, and it's all designed differently for you to stream straight to any screen whenever you want.
ABC News Live.
Streaming everywhere, right to you.
ABC News Live. It's that easy to go there.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, I'm grateful you woke up this morning.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning, sunshine. We've been waiting for you. Say good morning. Good morning, sunshine. In America. Say good morning. I want you to wake me up.
ABC News, America's #1 news source. Straightforward news, straight to the heart of the story. ABC News, straightforward.
I am a 22-year-old running for mayor in my hometown, Lancaster, Ohio, and I'm also the first woman to run for mayor in Lancaster. It's really wild that it's 2019 and Lancaster has yet to see a woman run for office, even a woman for mayor, but here I am. So I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for coming out tonight, especially on such a short notice. Today we'll be covering likely Democratic voters, so there should be no hostility. We go. Woo!
Have you done this much?
Yeah, so every weekend.
Oh my God.
Yep.
This is terrifying.
Yeah, no, it's super nerve-wracking. My 3 main platforms are an inclusive Lancaster that supports every citizen, recycling and city infrastructure, and as well as changing the stigma and narrative around drug use and drug abuse.
I'm only slightly brown-skinned, and living in Lancaster is like sometimes weird. I was kind of scared and excited.
Me too.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, trying to support best I can.
way that people will vote for you is how they view representation, how relatable you are. And so obviously, like, you know, I'm not the most relatable figure, but, you know, I was born in this community, I grew up in this community. There are so many people who know me on a person level and not just the way that I look. There are a lot of people who want to see more people involved in government, and more people want to see younger people involved in the government.
I was thrilled when she started saying, well, I'm going to run for mayor. Tiffany understood so quickly, education should not be seen as somehow separate from life. I mean, she really has such a sophisticated understanding at the same time that she's not, she's able to relate to people.
Using her business and building her business to pay her way through school is an incredibly inspiring example of leadership. Because that's how I see leadership is not letting your circumstances get in the way of achieving your goals.
So one of the things you have to do when you're running for office is file a lot of paperwork. A lot of the questions they ask you are things that just don't apply to me. What investments and assets do you own? So I don't own a house, I'm not married. So it's actually going really, really quickly.
Can't make it out there until about 5:30 or 6.
If I lose this election, I still win in other ways.
Glad you were here. Yeah, no, I was.
Because I'm the first woman and person of color to run for mayor, hopefully this breaks down at least some barriers so that other people can run for office. My connection to the yellow suit is that it relates to the yellow dress, the yellow kid dress that people are familiar with. You know, as an Asian person, and this idea of being a yellow person, and kind of taking back that word to be my own. And then also kind of becoming Lancaster's yellow kid through the suit. Before I had announced I was running, I didn't even consider that my race would be an issue. You want to cook the noodles because you're better with the... Okay. That was one thing my mom warned me about before I ran for office. This is something that people aren't familiar with and that you should be prepared to take on that sort of criticism. There is negativity that comes with and hardships that come with running for office. Sometimes it feels so impossible. What does a 22-year-old girl think she's doing running for mayor of her hometown? Negative criticism can really weigh down. I just remind myself who I am, what I'm working for. Thank goodness for the incredible support network that I have. Without them, there's no way that any of this would be possible. So one of the endorsements that I have is through First Ask, which is a political organization whose mission is to endorse women who are running for office for the first time. I really wouldn't be able to run for office if it wasn't for this endorsement. They provide a lot of guidance, a lot of advice.
Definitely some of the feedback she received was that she couldn't win because she was a Democrat running in such a heavily Republican city. But also I think that she was also trying to be like the first woman mayor. That in itself is sort of a systemic barrier.
Personalize anything that you like.
It's
it's okay, but I'm not crazy about a woman mayor.
I don't know if she's seriously running for mayor or if this is some sort of, I don't want to say publicity stunt, but some sort of school project.
Things around here are not as bad as one might think, but we still deal with race and color issues every day, everywhere.
I think it's long overdue for women to be in elected office at every single solitary level. That's not to say I'm against the current mayor. He's a good guy. But I am very much for women at all levels entering political races.
Tiffany has stated that you don't need a lot of experience to run a campaign for mayor, and I didn't have any experience at all when I ran 2 years ago, so that's probably true. I've only met Tiffany one time. She came into my office and interviewed me a number of months ago. I know that she grew up here. She ran track with my granddaughter in high school, and that's pretty much all I know about her. I have not observed any efforts on her part to campaign or anything that she's done to get out there and get the vote.
Yeah, so that was a huge accident. I didn't find out about it until maybe last week. And so I didn't get any notification on it, and it just suspended the domain account, but it's up and running now. A little under 2 weeks exactly to the election day. I'm so nervous about it. I was invited as a member of the business community in Lancaster to mentor high school students. This is the first time that Scheffler and I have been in the same rooms since February. I kind of feel like I'm entering into Mayor Scheffler's territory. It's downtown. These are a lot of very established, well-to-do business owners in Lancaster, whereas my circle tends to be the fringe people on the outside. So we'll see how it goes.
You ran with Olivia. You must have been like a senior then.
Yeah.
Well, good to see you again.
Yeah, it's nice seeing you.
Yeah, I'm glad you're going to stop in and see me and learn about running the city before one of these days.
It was the second time I'd ever had an interaction with her. Yeah, so I probably wouldn't have recognized her without her name tag. But I just thought she was another student. Being mayor was never on my bucket list. I was talked into running for mayor. We pay our bus drivers $9.50 an hour, which is embarrassing. We need to get that up. More jobs, more high-paying jobs, more residential opportunities across the whole spectrum of income. So this election is kind of quiet, and I'm actually concentrating on we have an income tax increase, a city income tax increase on the ballot in November. So that's been my focus, to get that passed, and I've been out doing a lot of presentations and meetings about informing the public as to the need for a city income tax increase.
Yeah, since the last time I saw you, which was several months ago, I feel like a totally new person. I think that Tiffany then had a very naive idea of how politics were, especially at a local level. Because the way that I saw Lancaster and running for office was very like small town, I don't know, kind of like Gilmore Girls-esque kind of, where it's very like, very communal, everyone knows each other, and there's no one trying to start up anything bad. And, you know, the world's a little bit different. There have been some tight months trying to cover rent to make sure that I had enough working hours. Selva, come here. One of my biggest beliefs is I think more people should run for office, and like regular people. It's really great when people who are really passionate about things just get out there and try. I hope more of it starts to happen. I'm feeling pretty nervous. I did not sleep at all.
This is a big day. This is the biggest thing that we're going to do for a while.
I just sometimes feel that age and experience is more what we need rather than youth.
I voted for Tiffany Pico. I just kind of go with party and more than knowing them personally a lot of times.
Tiffany.
Why?
She's a chick. It does not shock me that this is the first time that there's been a female on the ballot for mayoral candidacy. It does not shock me a bit.
Super excited. That was really a really surreal thing, seeing my name on the ballot. 9 months.
Wait, what?
9 months. It's been 9 months.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, it has.
Yeah. I know. I just feel older now. I feel older, and I forget that I'm 22 years old. I'm glad we came up here, though, on the day of the election. Just a couple hours away from the party. Got a 7:30 check the results.
I have 2 cats and a dog, a turtle.
I'm waiting for the live feed to come up because it's past 7:30, but it hasn't updated yet. I just graduated. It's the election. And I said, what the heck, let's do it.
Honestly, it makes everybody feel like they can do more. Seeing other people get emotional to it just gets to me, but...
I'm so nervous to look at it.
My biggest concern is whether the income tax increase passes. As far as the mayor's election, I don't have any concerns or anything. I think it's pretty cut and dry.
0%. Oh, wait a second. Oh, wait. We're sitting at 30% the vote for Tiff Pico. And then Scheffler's at the lead at 72%. I mean, I'm still so nervous. But, like, I don't know. I'm very happy, though, with how it's going so far.
With 5% of the vote in, I have 72%, and my opponent has 28%. I don't anticipate it changing much.
Even though percentage-wise it might not look that great, the numbers right now say that 345 people voted yes for Tiffany. I mean, that just means that 345 people had that option and believed in Tiffany.
Dude, what if you win? I know. Have you like actually thought about that? Only kind of. And then I'm like, no. Not right now. I know, right?
See ya.
Bye, honey. Have a good night.
It's 10:30. Party's wrapped up. It appears the election is pretty much decided. At 50% of the precincts counted, I'm up 71-29, I think. I was happy that Tiffany entered the race. It's always good to see young people involved in city government, and I hope she doesn't let it drop now.
Party just ended because it is freezing, and people had to go home. Still at 92%. Gotta hit 100, huh? 100%. We're at 100%.
All right.
1,400. Oh my gosh. 1,400. voted for me. Oh my God! So we didn't win, but yeah, I mean, 1,400 people came out. We had a party. Anyone was invited. Anyone could come out. Like, I knew people were excited to see me run because it was the first time a woman has done it. But like, it really didn't hit me until tonight that this is the first time a woman has ever done this. And people were excited about it. Like, that's so cool. People there who supported this, who wanted this, and it's time.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
You trust him? I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange. Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now, imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
ABC News, straightforward.
The way that we choose presidential candidates in the United States is pretty unique. In most countries, the parties themselves are responsible for choosing whoever they want their candidates to be. In the United States, we ask voters to decide. But our primary system isn't in the Constitution. It exists because of something that happened in 1968 at the Democratic National Convention. For the majority of American history, most states didn't have primaries, and the primaries that did exist were not like the ones we have today. They were basically like straw polls, non-binding votes that told party leaders which candidates were electable. But party leaders didn't have to listen to the voters. Instead, delegates from each state would meet at the National Convention, wheel and deal, and eventually land on a presidential nominee. That was still the case in the late 60s. Back then, the Democratic Party was deeply divided. It was divided over the war in Vietnam. It was also divided over the civil rights movement. And the months leading up to the Democratic National Convention were very tumultuous. First, President Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for re-election.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Then Robert Kennedy, an anti-war frontrunner, was tragically assassinated.
Together we are a great country and a selfish country and a compassionate country. And I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of the next few months.
In the end, there were two main contenders vying for the nomination: Hubert Humphrey, the establishment candidate, and Eugene McCarthy, the anti-war candidate. Anti-war activists realized that if they couldn't get a bunch of delegates who supported Eugene McCarthy to the convention, he wasn't going to get nominated. Now, if this happened under the system that we have today, McCarthy supporters would just need to get a bunch of people to go out and vote for McCarthy in the primary in order for him to win the nomination. But that's not how things worked back then. Even if, say, 50% of a state supported Eugene McCarthy, that didn't mean that 50% of the state's delegates would actually go to the convention to vote for McCarthy. This upset a lot of McCarthy supporters, and it set them on the path to change the Democratic Party rules for selecting the nominee.
NYPD and the invaders will not be seen tonight, so that ABC News can bring you color coverage of the 1968 Democratic National Convention.
This all came to a head at the Democratic National Convention in 1968 in Chicago, which was an absolute disaster. Outside the convention hall, there was basically a riot, but inside the convention hall was pretty chaotic as well. Famously, Dan Rather, the reporter, got punched in the stomach on national television. It was a whole fiasco.
It was obviously getting roughed up. I tried to talk to the man, and we got bodily pushed out of the way.
And essentially, because Hubert Humphrey had the support of party insiders, he ended up winning the nomination. The anti-war part of the Democratic Party was pretty upset with how the whole thing shook out. They put forward a proposal to change the rules of the Democratic Party so that the delegates that go to the National Convention have to fairly reflect the preferences of the people in the state where they came from. It's debated whether or not a lot of the delegates on the floor actually even understood what they were voting for, but they passed it nonetheless, and it amounted to a complete overhaul of the party nominating system in America. What happened next is Democrats lost the 1968 election to Richard Nixon. And in the aftermath of that loss, they created a commission to put the new rules into effect. And those new rules were almost surprisingly effective. By 1972, every state in the country had implemented the new rules that the party put forward. All future state delegations would have to reflect the preferences of voters in that state. And the changes didn't just apply to Democrats. The new rules required changing state laws. So Republicans eventually ended up adopting those changes as well, creating the primary system we have today.
In the frozen fields of northeast Iowa sits the tiny town of Postville, a quiet community of 2,100 with a powerful lesson to share on the promise and perils of immigration.
The slogan on the signs outside is "Hometown to the World." How did that come to be?
Well, we've had so many different people come here. The packing plant takes about 700 workers. It's not a nice place to work, but it's a job.
Meatpacking is the lifeblood of Postville, drawing migrant workers and their families from all over the world.
Joy, thank you so much.
Joy Minikue teaches English to young immigrants at the local high school.
So we have our refugee population, our Somali population. We have students from Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, Djibouti. We've had students from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico.
But 12 years ago, Postville was shaken to its core.
One of the first things I remember is hearing the helicopters outside of the school.
May 12, 2008, 389 arrested, including 56 women and children. It's still the biggest single-site immigration raid in U.S. history.
The chaos and the fear that kind of came after that was very intense with the students.
The roundup at agri-processors, one of the largest kosher meatpacking plants in the country, affected the entire county. Businesses closed, families torn apart.
If Agri decides to pull out, I'll guarantee you this will be a ghost town.
Morgan Talkie was in 7th grade during the raid.
There were kids that were left behind, kids that never saw their mom or dad again, kids that were living with complete strangers because they didn't know, where mom or dad were even at. And it destroyed our town.
Now 24, Morgan is trying to help Postville recover, adopting 12-year-old Haiti Castillo Hernandez, who was born in the town, deported back to Guatemala with her parents after the raid, and then returned to Iowa to go to school.
There wasn't really a whole lot of options for Haiti. I knew in my heart I was able to do it.
The meatpacking plant has since reopened under a new name, recruiting workers from Eastern Europe, Central America, Africa, and most recently, Puerto Rico.
It's lunchtime here at the city's meatpacking plant. As you can take a look around me, you see workers from all over the world. 8 different countries are represented here. The company says the work is so challenging, they have a hard time attracting workers.
An insatiable demand for labor that's transformed Main Street, Postville, into a global marketplace.
Still interesting town. I mean, it's a nice town of opportunities.
From the dried chili wall at Ricardo's to glatt kosher goods at the Jewish market. 2 doors down, Saeed Ibrahim, a Trump supporter and new American citizen,
congratulations,
sells headscarves for Muslim women and other staples for traditional Somali cooking.
This is from Africa.
How do you like living in Postville? It's cold.
It's cold, but it's good, very nice.
Good community?
Yeah.
Very nice.
Ibrahim is one of the dozens of Somalis who work at the meatpacking plant.
So you like President Trump?
Yeah. My country now, American.
Your country's American?
Yeah, no.
But just across the street from Saeed's shop at Club 51, the town's only bar, a reminder of just how divided the country is.
I mean, you can't just let everybody come in.
Right, and kill people.
We need to stop
and kill innocent women like over there.
They come in the right way. I'm fine with
that Molly girl.
But how do you feel? How do you feel about, you have a lot of immigrants in this town? Over half the town is immigrants.
No,
you gotta get rid of them. You gotta get rid of them.
You think get rid of them?
If they come legally, I have no problem.
I like the Mexicans. Get rid of the Somalis and the Jews.
They're doing most of the work that half the white people don't want to do.
My wife's
at the meat factory.
In this community where immigrants drive the economy, Postville's Republican mayor says he doesn't agree with Trump that the country is full.
We have accepted immigrants. There's room for everybody, but it has to go through the legal.
Democrats see an opening on the issue of immigration. Lori Egan is the local Democratic Party chair.
If there is a mass deportation of immigrants, our farming economy would collapse.
Alameda County has picked the president in the last 6 elections, backing Barack Obama twice before swinging big to Trump in 2016.
I don't regret my vote for not voting for Hillary.
To win here, Democrats need voters like retired local 911 dispatcher and jailer Rev Lawning, who voted for Trump but is keeping an open mind for 2020.
You're planning to support President Trump?
I have to wait and see who the Democrats
You're going to wait and see your choices. There you go.
There's some I don't like and there's some I do.
And local businessman Aaron Goldsmith voted twice for Bill Clinton, but backed Trump 4 years ago thinking he'd be good for business.
I'm not firm on Donald Trump. Do I like what Trump is saying? I don't think I like what he's saying. I like some of the things that he's doing. I don't think people went crazy for Trump, but they are crazy to be heard.
Crazy to be heard and crazy for a fix to the polarizing politics of our time.
I think Postville is a great example of people coming together, no matter what their culture or background.
And you don't even have a stoplight.
Nope. Everybody takes their turn.
Devin Dwyer, ABC News, Alameda County, Iowa.
Today in America, the way we choose presidential nominees is by having voters go to the polls and weigh in on who they want their party's candidate to be. But there's a theory called the party decides that says behind the scenes, the parties are actually pulling the strings and determining who the party's nominee will be. Today, we're going to check out whether or not that theory holds up looking at historic elections. As we discussed in the last episode, the system that we have today, where voters choose presidential candidates, began in the 70s. Back then, there's reason to believe that the parties weren't doing the deciding, in large part because they didn't know how to exert their power. At the time, Republicans were running incumbents, so they didn't have much deciding to do anyway. On the Democratic side, however, the party apparatus wasn't particularly keen on either of the candidates who ended up winning the nomination that decade. The first was South Dakota Senator George McGovern, who faced an anybody but McGovern campaign that year. The second was Jimmy Carter.
You got a mighty fine product.
When he ran for re-election, Senator Ted Kennedy from his own party ran a primary campaign against him.
Tell the President of the United States what I had expressed on television the other evening, and that is I have every intention of continuing in this campaign as a candidate.
So in the 70s, the parties were clearly not deciding. But that doesn't mean, however, that the theory is altogether bunk. Throughout the 70s, the parties were learning how this new process worked. And by the 80s, they could play the system. In other words, use money and influence to get their preferred candidates nominated. So how can we tell whether or not this is happening if it's all behind the scenes? One way is by looking at party endorsements heading into the Iowa caucuses, the first contest in the nation. And the data shows that from the 80s through the early 2000s, any candidate who entered the Iowa caucus with a clear lead in party endorsements went on to win that party's nomination. A prime example of this is the 2000 election between Vice President Al Gore and Governor of Texas George Bush. Both parties clearly lined up behind those two candidates, gave them resources, and in the actual primary, Al Gore went on to win every single nominating contest, and George Bush won 44 of them. Things changed, though, in the elections since 2000, importantly with regards to the internet and fundraising. The 2004 election is a good example, with Howard Dean running for the Democratic nomination. Howard Dean appealed to voters on the internet and was able to fundraise through the internet as well. And so he didn't have to rely as heavily on the normal sources of support like the party or the mainstream media in order to begin to gain traction. In fact, he ran against the party as part of his primary campaign.
And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House.
So Howard Dean did not go on to win the nomination in 2004, but his campaign showed that there were cracks forming in this party decides model. The next couple elections revealed some vulnerabilities in the theory as well. For example, in 2008, going into Iowa, Hillary Clinton was the leader in endorsements, but Barack Obama won the nomination. That said, Obama was well respected among party insiders and did already have some endorsements. But then, in 2016, on the Republican side, the party decides model completely fell apart. It's hard to remember now, but when Donald Trump got into the Republican primary, he didn't have any party support. Not a single member of Congress endorsed his campaign for 8 months. And it wasn't until after he had already won multiple primaries that he got his first congressional endorsement. All that didn't matter, though. The party wasn't able to decide. Donald Trump got about 30% of support in initial primaries, and that was enough to win him the Republican Party nomination without almost any support from the party. All of this is to say that the party can decide under a certain set of circumstances, and did decide for about 2 decades. But given today's environment, when candidates can appeal to voters and fundraise in unconventional ways, the party doesn't seem to be able to necessarily decide. President Trump is a great example of that. We'll see what happens on the Democratic side in 2020. Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time today. So here in South Carolina, you are known as a kingmaker, and in 538's endorsement tracker, your endorsement is worth the most points possible. So what do you think your endorsement means here in South Carolina?
Well, I don't know what it means. I know what I want it to mean.
What do you want it to
mean? I made clear to the Democratic National Committee that if they were to select South Carolina as one of the so-called pre-primary window states, that I would not do anything to undercut the primary in any way or to short-circuit it. And they felt that if I were to get out with an early endorsement, that other candidates might not come. And then CBS, who is co-sponsoring the debate with the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, also expressed the same concern. So I decided that I would not endorse until last Friday. My accountant passed away, and I went to his funeral. And when I got there were 4 or 5 people. I got there about 30 minutes early, and 4 or 5 people came up to me, all of them saying one thing. We would like to hear from you, or we're waiting to hear from you. There's a bunch of candidates. We don't know who's best. Who do you think is best? And I was smiling and ducking and weaving. And finally, an elderly African-American woman looked up at me, and I looked at her, and she kind of beckoned me to come over to her. And I walked over to her. She was there on the front row of the church. And she leaned down here, and she whispered to me, she says, I've been waiting to hear from you. A lot of people want to hear from you. Just whisper in my ear who I should vote for.
Did you tell her?
Yes, I did.
And so according to, multiple sources, reports say that you plan on endorsing Joe Biden on Wednesday morning. Are those reports correct?
I've read that.
You've read that?
I've read
okay.
those reports. Yeah, I've read those reports.
And are they correct?
I'm not going to pass on that just yet. I've made it very clear that I will make my views known at 9:15 on Wednesday morning.
And do you think that people will follow your lead? And perhaps more to the point, do you think they should follow your lead when you do make your endorsement known?
Let me just say I am hopeful that they will. I spent pretty much all of my life studying South Carolina politics. I've been in Congress now for 28 years. I'm a student of history. I studied trends. And I see developing in this primary much of what I saw back in 1972. Now, most people who are involved out now passing judgment on everything, they don't remember back to 1972, but I do. And it's eerie, similar.
And you're talking about George McGovern.
George
and
McGovern.
A particularly liberal coalition that he
That's
built
exactly
up
right.
during the primary.
Absolutely, almost the same as it is now. I remember that so well. In 1972, Miami Convention, us Southerners were over in one camp, and I'm talking about Southern, I'm talking about throughout the South. Those states, so much so, and we were being run over by others. In fact, Jesse Jackson Jr., who's Jesse Jackson Sr., who is from South Carolina, I played athletics against him when we were growing up. He was big in the George McGovern camp. Imaru Baraka, Leroy Jones, big. They were just, and we were sitting there saying, wait a minute, the country is not going to go that way. This country is not ready to go that way. But they won.
So relating that to today, are you essentially saying that you hope to stop Senator Sanders from winning the nomination because you see him building too much of a liberal coalition to win a general election?
I'm not trying to stop him. I'm saying to people what I think we need and who I think we need. I'm not trying to stop anybody.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to inform.
I'm curious, so at 538, we spend a lot of time tracking public opinion, trying to figure out what the will of the people actually is. And we rely a lot on polls. How do you come to a conclusion about what or who is best for South Carolina?
I go to church, and I should say churches. I go to social places. I go to restaurants. I go to lounges. And I talk mostly to the people in motels and hotels who are cleaning the furniture, sweeping the floors. Those are the people I talk to. I've had one media person since we've been here to ask me in the motel I'm staying over in the Marriott. He says, everybody, all the people who work here know you. I said, yeah, they know me, and I know them. And I think that's important. I hang out with all the uppity mucks, but I really spend a lot of time gathering people's feelings, knowing what they say. When I up in the State House, up in the United States Capitol, the most meaningful article ever written about me, I think was, I don't remember whether it was a roll call or what, one of the organs on the Hill wrote a story, and they had a picture of the people who moving the furniture and all that stuff around there. And they were talking about which congressman they most respected and felt comfortable with. And I was selected because I never overlook. They are over 18. They're raising children, grandchildren. These are people who really have aspirations, and I talk to them.
So that's how you come to a conclusion about what's best for South Carolina.
Yeah.
So what is best for South Carolina? What does the state need from a nominee or a president?
We need a nominee who will do three things. Explain to people what your candidacy means to them. Say to them, this is what my election means to you. This is what my election means to your family. And this is what my election means to your community. And I've said to every one of the candidates who've asked, talk to people about what's in it for you. Let them know what their families can get from there. Let them know what you will do to improve their communities. And so I tend to do everything under those three headings. Make this country's greatness accessible and full. I put up billboards around in hope that it would be a suggestion to all the people coming. I've been saying, this country does not need to be made great. It is great. The problem we've got is making that greatness accessible and affordable for all. When we talk about healthcare, nobody needs to know the ins and outs of healthcare. They need to know how this healthcare system can be accessible and affordable for them. They need to know whether or not our energy sources will be accessible and affordable to them. When you're talking about infrastructure, is it broadband you're talking about, or who gets another road or bridge? Is it energy you're talking about? That is what we've got to do. And if you make this housing and healthcare, broadband, energy, you name it, education, make it accessible and affordable, I think that's how you connect to people. Our problem, it seems to me, is too many candidates spend time trying to let people know how smart they are, rather than trying to connect with people.
Are you referring to anybody in particular?
No, not anybody in particular. I've been arguing with my caucus about this for a long time. Let me give you one good example. What it means to you when a candidate says you need to be able to send your kids to college. Now, how many times have you heard that? I hate to hear that.
Yeah.
And I tell my caucus, I don't need to hear that, because we got people who want to be electricians, they want to be plumbers, they want to be a lot of things. Barbers. My barber has both of his sons in the barbershop with him. That's what they want to do.
So to that point, South Carolina has one of the lowest median incomes in the country.
Absolutely.
Bernie Sanders spends a lot of time talking about the structural challenges for poor people in America. Mm-hmm. But you've made it clear that you're not interested in a democratic socialist. Why don't you think that's the right prescription, given how much of a focus there is in his platform on the poor?
There's a big difference to me between rhetoric and reality. I'm 79 years old. I'm older than Bernie. And I've had experiences he has not had. I am not a millionaire. I've raised 3 children. And I'm now helping to raise 4 grandchildren. So I don't want to hear a lot of rhetoric. I want to know what's real. And it's not real that child care is going to be free for everybody. At what age? 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 3 or 2? When do you make child care free? When do you make education free? It's not realistic that you're going to eliminate all student debt. What is realistic is to lay out some programs as to how education is going to be affordable. Child care is going to be affordable. My grandson, 25 years old, who is on the staff of Mayor Pete, all he's ever said to me, I don't want it to be free. I would love to afford it. And that's what it's all about. People want to earn their keep. You know, there may be some people, but as a rule, people want you to give them anything. We want you to remove the stumbling blocks so it'll be accessible for me. Move all of the areas that would make it unaffordable. That's what people want.
South Carolina is something of an existential test for former Vice President Joe Biden's campaign, which he's staked in large part on his appeal to voters of color. Being on the ground here in South Carolina, close to the action, how do you think he'll perform?
Well, if the election were held today, it won't be until Saturday. If it were held today, I think he would finish first. How first, I don't know. I think that if Amy Klobuchar had the resources, she would do very well here.
Why Amy Klobuchar in particular?
Because I know South Carolinians, and I know what appeals to South Carolinians. And she has a message that appeals. She has a style that appeals to South Carolinians. And I also know that, you know, people tell me, well, you know, young people this and young people that. Well, the fact of the matter is, Bernie is one of the oldest people out there, and a lot of young people, most of the young people, shouldn't be voting for him. So, you know, and I've said that to Mayor Pete. Age ain't going to make a big difference. If you're 37 or 38 years old, people say, well, the young people are going to vote for you. That ain't what's happening. And so that's why I think the rhetoric is one thing. You know, South Carolinians have reset these primaries many times on both sides of the aisle. When Bill Clinton got to South Carolina, he lost about 8 or 9, maybe 10 contests before he got to South Carolina. But he got his campaign reset here. Hillary Clinton had just lost New Hampshire to Bernie Sanders. South Carolina, she got over 80% of the black voting in South Carolina after losing in New Hampshire.
I want to ask you about that specifically. So no Democrat has won the party's nomination without winning the majority of black support since 1992. And in the past 2 contests in particular, you've seen the black vote arguably be decisive, in large part because it's unified, right? Clinton won about 80% in the primary. Obama won about 80% in the primary. This year, it looks like the black vote in South Carolina and nationally is more divided between Biden and Sanders, and then even here in South Carolina, Steyer. Right. Are there specific things that you see that are causing divisions within the African-American community over who they want to vote for, or is that just a byproduct of having such a deep field?
We got a broad field. 20-some-odd people were running. We had 3 African-Americans in the contests. There's just a big, wide, broad, diverse field, and there's more money being spent in this primary than ever before. When have we ever had 2 billionaires running in the Democratic primary for anything?
Yeah.
And so when you've got money to spend and you spend it, you are going to be very influential in advertising your message, especially when you're driving out others. You cannot tell me that there are more black people in South Carolina with sentiments toward Cory Booker and Kamala Harris than there are toward Steyer. So why is it that Steyer is polling 14, 15% in the African-American community, and Cory and Kamala are gone from the contest? It's all about the money. I have said, and I believe this very strongly, that the Citizens United decision on the part of the United States Supreme Court was the worst Supreme Court decision since Dred Scott. I have said that, and I believe that very strongly. When you make money speech, and that's what that speech did, you are saying that the person with the most money got the most speech. And if you've got an African-American community that ain't making as much money as white people, you are saying white people got more speech than black people. That is a bad, bad decision, and this country is going to wake up one day, and if we don't get rid of that decision, and find out that that's what brought the country down.
You mentioned that Harris and Booker are now out of the race, and from a historically diverse field, it's been winnowed to what's remaining are white candidates.
Right.
Do you think that white politicians are able to fully represent the interests of black Americans?
It all depends upon the experiences these candidates have. I have said, my biography, which I wrote, and by the way, the readers of Amazon gives it 5 stars, so it ain't a joke book. I call it Blessed Experiences. And I say in that book that all my experiences have not been pleasant, but I've considered all of them to be blessings. And it's which candidate has been blessed with the most meaningful experiences that they can share. And I believe that that is what makes the candidate in the black community.
What specifically do you have to see from a white politician to make it clear that they get it? They understand what needs to be done to represent the African American community.
If you can go to a group of people and say, here is what my candidacy means for you. Do you want to have better health care for yourselves? Do you want pre-existing conditions to be protected? Just go through the litany. Then says, what do you want for your family? Do you want to be able to educate your children? Not send them to college, but to educate them. Make them plumbers, make them electricians, if that's what their aspirations are. And here is what's in it for your family. And go in the community. You need broadband in your community. Am I willing to lay out a plan as to how we will have total coverage of broadband? Because that's the way you're going to keep your rural hospitals open. That's how you're going to keep your schools functional and adequate. Broadband. What is in it for you, your family, your community? And why that's so hard, I don't understand. All of this foolishness that we talk about, I sat down with the CBS people and I said to them, I said, look, you're sponsoring this debate. This is South Carolina. There's no way in the world you can come to Charleston, South Carolina, directly across the street from Emmanuel Church and do what you did, what was done out there in Nevada, where we had the worst mass shooting anywhere. And it was never, ever mentioned. Nothing about it was mentioned. You ain't gonna be across the street from Emmanuel AME Church, where we had the most egregious, I think, assassination of worshipers, and not mention that. And that says now, you're gonna be in Charleston. North Charleston has the highest eviction rate in the country, according to a Princeton University study. So you can't come and not talk about housing and affordable housing. We led the nation until a few years ago in amputations because of the late detection of diabetes. My wife, who recently deceased, spent 20 years fighting diabetes. At one time was a 4-shot-a-day diabetic. So you ain't gonna come to South Carolina with that kind of record, and you're gonna be 6 blocks from the Medical University of South Carolina and not talk about health care. So that, to me, is whether or not we get these candidates to focus on what these people's experiences are as they live. We are but the sum total of our experiences, and the candidate that can appeal to people at their level of experiences, not up there at 35,000 feet, but go to them where they live, what they're experiencing. And if you appeal to that, you're gonna do well.
You mentioned the white nationalist terrorist attack at Mother Emanuel. And the conversation, it seems like, within the Democratic Party about race has changed significantly over the past decade. I think quite famously, Obama ran a campaign that de-emphasized some of the differences between white and black America, saying, there's no white America, there's no black America, there's these United States of America. Even though the field right now is white candidates, the conversation is a lot more specific about the ways that white and black America are different when it comes to health, wealth, criminal justice, all sorts of things. Reparations, for example. What do you think of how the conversation about race has changed in the Democratic Party over the past decade?
It's still just a conversation. Sure as it's changed. We're not talking about race more than we did several years ago. If you're looking at Barack Obama, he doesn't need to tell you how black he is. You're looking at him.
Yeah.
So these other candidates who ain't black, they may have to address the question. But I think we need to be realistic even about reparations. The root word for reparations is repair. What do we need to do to repair? And that's what you ought to be saying about reparations. But for some strange reason, and in this campaign, the first time reparations came up, I still remember Mayor Pete struggling with that, saying he monetized it. All these candidates, they immediately start thinking how much money each person is supposed to get for reparations. Nobody ever asked for it to be monetized. Why we keep going there? What we do ask is how are we going to repair our faults? I prepared for a campaign 2 years ago by rereading Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. There's one little sentence in one volume of that 2-volume book that said this: America's greatness is not because it is more enlightened than any other nation, but because they have always been able to repair its faults. That is what makes us great. So how do you repair the faults of slavery? Not how you monetize it, but how do you repair the faults? And if the candidates would go out for that, that's what my 10, 20, 30 is about. And that's why you see Bernie Sanders immediately picked up on the fact. He said, when they asked him about reparations, Mayor Pete was talking about monetizing it. Bernie says, I'm going to adopt Jim Clyburn's 10, 20, 30 formula. That's how I'm going to address reparations.
So you say when the candidates talk about monetizing reparations, that's the wrong way of doing things. What do you think the right way of doing things is?
I just said, what programs do you have that will repair the faults of slavery? Were African Americans undereducated? South Carolina has in its constitution.
And I want to say
reaffirmed by
congratulations to Vice President Biden. I will be the first to say that the first 4 contests haven't gone exactly as I'd hoped. If you want to change the outcome in the next contest, go to ElizabethWarren.com, chip in now, get involved. Super Tuesday's 3 days away. We want to gain as many delegates to the convention as we can, from California to right here in Texas. You know, it may take days or even longer to know the full results from Super Tuesday, but they will be critical in sorting out who our nominee will be this year. My campaign is built for the long haul, and we are looking forward to these big contests. So I want to thank you. I want to start by thanking Judge Lena Hidalgo. She is amazing, the face of Houston, the future of Texas. Boy, a woman leader for America. So thank you, Lena. I also want to say a very, very special thank you to Randy Weingarten and all the teachers who are here tonight. And a special thank you to United We Dream, who is here. This is how we build a Democratic Party that wins. We do it by all coming together here. So thank you all. And thank you for welcoming me back to Texas. You know, I did some real growing up here. I finished college at the University of Houston. Go Cougs! Had my first job as a law professor at U of H and then at UT. Go Longhorns! Now, usually I begin my events by talking about how we've become a country that works better and better for those at the top and worse for everyone else. I love to talk about plans for making this country work for everyone. I got a plan for that. But tonight, with your permission, I'd really like to use our time together a little differently. I'd like to skip the usual stories and instead first talk about a crisis that is upon us. And then I know some of you came here to hear about other policies, so we'll take some minutes near the end to talk about things like immigration reform and climate and the all-important, then we will cut to the all-important selfie line. So we'll get this done. The crisis that is upon us now. For nearly a year, I have expressed concern about the weakness in our economy. I've called attention to a manufacturing sector that is tumbling into recession. Talked about debt loads that were unsustainable. Discussed an economy.
Thank you. Thank you, Virginia Beach and Norfolk. And let me start off by thanking Herb Jones. For too long, we have taken veterans in this country for granted. We have sent them off to wars, and too often those wars were wars that should never have been fought. And then, after they put their lives on the line and they come home, sometimes injured in body and sometimes injured in spirit, we have forgotten about them. So my promise to Herb and to all the other veterans of this country, and I say this as the former chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, our administration will never forget the veterans. And our administration will never put the men and women in the armed forces in wars that should not be fought. We are here tonight because we are determined that Donald Trump will be a one-term president. The American people, no matter what their political views may be, do not want a president in office who is a pathological liar, who is running a corrupt administration, who apparently has never read the Constitution of the United States, and who every day, through his attacks on the media, on the judiciary, on Congress, is undermining American democracy. Veterans like Herb and millions of others have put their lives on the line to defend our democracy and our Constitution, and Donald Trump will not undermine American democracy. Now, I am very proud that in this campaign so far, we have won the popular vote in Iowa. We have won the New Hampshire primary. We have won the Nevada caucus. But you cannot win them all. A lot of states out there, and tonight we did not win in South Carolina. And that will not be the only defeat. There are a lot of states in this country. Nobody wins them all. I want to congratulate Joe Biden on his victory tonight. And now we enter Super Tuesday in Virginia. And I believe very strongly that the people of this country on Super Tuesday and after are going to support our campaign, because we are more than a campaign, we are a movement. We are a multi-generational movement. I'm the young person. We got some old people too. We are a multi-racial movement. And we are a movement of millions of people who demand economic justice in this country, demand social justice and the end of racism and all forms of discrimination, and who demand environmental justice as well. We are a movement of millions of people who are sick and tired of the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality in America. We are tired of a handful of billionaires controlling the economic and political life of this nation. And we will create an economy and a government that work for all of us, not just the 1%. And that is what this campaign is about. This campaign understands that in order to defeat Donald Trump, and we have to be very clear about it, can't mince words about it. In order to defeat Trump, we are going to need the largest voter turnout in the history of this country. And in my view, old-fashioned politics, the same old type of politics that doesn't excite anybody, that doesn't energize anybody, that is not going to be the campaign that beats Trump. In order to beat Trump, what we are going to have to do is speak to millions of working class people who today are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're worried about their kids, they're worried about their retirement, they can't afford health care, and they are saying, who cares about me? Who is worried about me? I've seen candidates run to billionaires' homes to raise money. Is anybody worrying about me and my kids? And our job together is to reach out to those working people and say, you know what? We do care about you. Join us. Come on into our movement. And then we've got to reach out to the young people in this country. The young people in America today, and I'm proud to say this, they are the most progressive generation of young people in the history of this country. This is a generation that is strongly anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobia, anti-religious bigotry. This is a generation that believes in the need to deal with the crisis of climate change. But this is also a generation that does not vote in the numbers that they need to vote. So our job, if we are going to beat Trump, is to say to those millions of young people, if you can't afford to go to college or you're leaving school deeply in debt, join us. If you're worried about the future of this planet and climate change, join us. If you are earning less money, as the younger generation is, than your parents, and you think you are entitled to a decent standard of living, join us. If you're sick and tired of trying to pay off your student debt, join us. So our job is to grow the voter turnout in America. I can't do it alone. I need every one of you to reach out to your friends, and when you've got friends.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Congressman Jim Clyburn.
Let me begin by thanking all of you for taking a little time out of your lives to come here and help us enhance the life of this great country. Thank you. I want to thank some of my colleagues over here, Alan Adams from North Carolina, Senators Malloy and Kimpson, who have been up and down with me for the last 2 days. Thank you. My daughters, Jennifer, Angela, thank you all so much. They have been as emotional about this last week experience as any two people I know, and I thank them so much. They have become so much better. As many of you know, I studied history, used to teach history. And I've said often to those students that I used to teach, and I'll often say to them, we study history in order to understand the present and to prepare for the future. Because anything that's happened before can happen again. And tonight, as I stand here, I am thinking about some of that history. Yes, sir. And I'm recalling something that's really attributed to a great Frenchman who came to this country to study our penal system and came to the conclusion that there was something magical about the United States of America. Now, in my research, I have not found that he actually said this or wrote this. But a lot of people give him credit for having said it. So if he didn't say it or didn't write it, then here's what you're getting from me. Alexis de Tocqueville is reputed to have said that the greatness of America lies in the fact that the goodness that exists in American people. And he supposedly said that if Americans ever cease to be good, America will cease to be great.
This campaign, this year, is about the goodness of America. And we have as our candidate a real good man. As I talk to people in trying to understand the voting patterns that were taking place and understand what many people were saying, it all bound down to one fact. People were confusing goodness as weakness. You do not have to be bombastic in order to get your point across. You don't have to call people names in order to have your positions understood. You don't have to tell falsehoods in order to make headlines about your proposals. We have as our candidate a man who understands what it's like to be an American. None of us have had the same experiences. All of us are but the sum total of our experiences. And all of our experiences have not been pleasant. But all of our experiences in one form or another have been blessings. And we are blessed with a candidate who understands what it is to restore the goodness that exists in this great country. He will get us away. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you really did not come here to hear me. And I did not come here to speak. I came here to introduce and present to you a good man. A man who understands the fundamentalist fairness upon which this democracy is built, a man who will restore the goodness of this business and take us to where this country can be. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, one who I know, who you know, but most of all, who knows us.
Take nothing less than the suffering best. Do not obey, nor must be forsake if you can pass the test. Just move on to a greater day. With just a little faith, if you put your mind to it, you can surely do it. Take nothing less than the suffering best. Do not obey, nor must be forsake if you can pass the test. Just move on to a greater day. With just a little faith, if you put your mind to it, you can surely do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. South Carolina. And my buddy Jim Clyburn, you brought me back. is a man of enormous integrity. All of those who've been knocked down, counted out, left behind, this is your campaign. Just days ago, the press and the pundits had declared this candidacy dead. Now, thanks to all of you, the heart of the Democratic Party, we've just won, and we've won big because of you. And we are very much alive. Look, I told you all that you could launch a candidacy. You launched Bill Clinton, Barack Obama to the presidency. Now you launched our campaign on the path to defeating Donald Trump. This campaign is taken off. So join us. Go to joebiden.com, sign up, volunteer, contribute if you can, but we need you, we want you, and there's a place for you in this campaign. Folks, as we celebrate tonight here in Columbia, let me talk directly to Democrats across America, especially those who will be voting on Super Tuesday. This is the moment to choose the path forward for our party. This is the moment, and it's arrived. Maybe sooner than anyone guessed it would, but it's here. And the decisions Democrats make all across America in the next few days will determine what this party stands for, what we believe, and what we'll get done. If Democrats nominate me, I believe we can beat Donald Trump. Keep Nancy Pelosi in the House of Representatives as Speaker, and take back the United States Senate. So join us. My fellow Democrats across America, join us. If Democrats want to nominate someone who will build on Obamacare, not scrap it, take on the NRA and gun manufacturers, not protect them. Stand up and give the poor a fighting chance and the middle class get restored, not raise their taxes and keep the promises we make. Then join us. And if the Democrats want a nominee who's a Democrat, a lifelong Democrat, a proud Democrat, an Obama-Biden Democrat, and join us. We have the option of winning big or losing big. That's the choice. We need to build on the coalition and legacy of the most successful president in our lifetime, Barack Obama. And the way we do this is by bringing Americans together of every race, ethnicity, gender, economic station, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, people of every stripe. Look, just like we did here in South Carolina. And like we can do across the entire country on Tuesday and beyond. Folks, win big or lose, that's the choice. Most Americans don't want the promise of revolution. They want more than promises. They want results. They want to give all Americans access to real opportunity, to be able to have affordable health care for all Americans, an environment with clean air and clean water, an education system that funds our schools, pays our teachers, makes community college free, a nation that will stand up to and beat the NRA. Reform our criminal justice system, root out institutional racism, mobilize the world against climate change. And an economy that works, rewards work, not just wealth. My dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than the paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about decency, it's respect. It's about your place in the community. It's being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay. For all our families, for all our communities. Because that's the right thing to do. That's what makes us Democrats. Talk is cheap. False promises are deceptive. And talk about revolution and changing anyone's life. We need real changes right now. Something I've done my whole career, and I'll do as president. So this is an election to spend all our time in a battle for the soul of the Democratic Party. This is a battle for the soul of the United States of America. And we're in an incredibly perilous moment, as all of you know. Winning means uniting America, not sowing more division and anger. It means not only fighting, but healing the country. We have to beat Donald Trump and the Republican Party, but here's the deal. We can't become like them. We can't become like them. We can't have a never-ending war. Above all, it's time for America to get back up. The country is so ready. So ready. Once again, fight for the proposition that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. We say it all the time, but we've never fully lived up to it. But we've never before, until this president, walked away from it. And it's the reason why Jim and I and all of us are in this. I believe with every fiber of my being that all men and women are created equal. You know, I saw it a few days ago in a town hall in Charleston, Jim. I spoke with Reverend Anthony Thompson, whose wife, Myra, was studying the words of her Bible with 8 other parishioners at Mother Emanuel 4.5 years ago. It was a weekly routine, reading Scripture and finding purpose and faith in God and in each other. And in an instant, hate, vengeance, white supremacy pierced that faith, and they were lost forever. But you know what I found the most remarkable thing in my career thus far? Remarkable about Reverend Thompson and the families of the Emanuel 9. Is through all that pain, yes, all that grief, they forgave. Yes, sir. Yes. And here's the deal. In their forgiveness, they brought more change to South Carolina than any that's occurred over the previous 100 years. Think about it. The Confederate flag came down. Real change. That's why the Sunday after, Jill and I and my family, we came back to Mother Emanuel on Sunday services after the funeral of the victims. Because 6 weeks earlier, we had lost our son, Bo. And we needed to be healed, too. We need to be healed. I really mean this. We needed whatever they were exuding. And with every season that's passed, they've gotten up and found purpose to live life worthy of the ones they lost, worthy of the blessings to live in this remarkable country. We left here, having arrived in overwhelming pain, thinking we can do this. We can get through this. So I want to tell you, it's no small reason why I'm in this race. People like all of you here tonight, all around the country. The days of Donald Trump's divisiveness will soon be over. No. And as Jim, quoting de Tocqueville, he was right. This multi-ethnic country we call our democracy, America, it can't survive unless we focus on our goodness. We can build a more perfect union because the American people in the last 3.5 years have seen the alternative. No, I really mean it. Think about it. They've seen how utterly mean, selfish, lack of any sense of empathy or concern for anybody else. A president who not only has horrible policies, but the way he mocks and makes fun of other people. To all of you here in South Carolina, and especially Jim Clyburn, my friend, who lifted me and this campaign on his shoulders.
That's right.
But I mean all of you. Many I don't have time to name, all of you. We, Jill and I, our daughter Ashley, my son Hunter has been on the phone straight through for me. My brothers, my sister, my two brothers, my sister, my five grandchildren, my four granddaughters who've come out on the campaign trail. We'll never forget what you've done for us. Well, we can say without fear of contradiction, the Bidens love you guys, man. The Bidens love you. That's real. And folks, now we need to stand behind Jamie Harrison, the next president of the United States, next senator of South Carolina. We need to send Joe Cunningham back to the House of Representatives. And all of us, all the Bidens, thank you. Thank you for everything, everything you've done for us. So folks, so here's the deal. Let's get back up. We're decent, we're brave, we're resilient people. We can't believe again. We're better than this mama. We're better than this president. So get up, take back our country. This is the United States of America. There's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hush not, child, and don't cry.
To have the lowest voter turnout of almost any major country on earth, we need to have the highest voter turnout. We cannot sit back and complain. We have got to get active and vote. Now, if we can win here in Virginia, and with your help, I think we can, we stand a great chance to win the Democratic nomination. And if we win the Democratic nomination, we sure as heck, we're gonna beat Donald Trump and beat him badly. Well, let me interrupt you and suggest that it's not Bernie, it is us, all of us. Because as you know, what this campaign is about is us, not me. So we are trying to change a nation so that all of us understand we are in it together. Every family in America, trust me, has its problems. And it is important that my family be there for your family be there for my family. We are in it together. We cannot turn our backs when other people are in pain. But us, not me, means something else. It means that we understand that no president alone can do what has to be done. We understand that real change in American history, whether it is the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, all those changes took place by millions of people standing up for justice. And that's where we are right now. We are the richest country in the history of the world, and we demand justice for all of our people. And whether Wall Street likes it or not, whether the insurance companies, the drug companies, the fossil fuel industry, the military-industrial complex, whoever, whether they like it or not, we are going to create an economy and a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. So let us go forward together. Let's win on Tuesday. Let us win the Democratic nomination. Let us defeat Trump. Let us transform this country. Thank you all very much.
A woman leader for America. So thank you, Lena. I also want to say a very, very special thank you to Randy Weingarten and all the teachers who are here tonight. And a special thank you to United We Dream. This is how we build a Democratic Party that wins. We do it by all coming together here. So thank you all. And thank you for welcoming me back to Texas. You know, I did some real growing up here. I finished college at the University of Houston. Go Cougs! Had my first job as a law professor at U of H and then at UT. Go Longhorns! Now, usually I begin my events by talking about how we've become a country that works better and better for those at the top and worse for everyone else. I love to talk about plans for making this country work for everyone. I got a plan for that. But tonight, with your permission, I'd really like to use our time together a little differently. I'd like to skip the usual stories and instead first talk about a crisis that is upon us. And then I know some of you came here to hear about other policies, so we'll take some minutes near the end to talk about things like immigration reform and climate and the all-important, then we will cut to the all-important selfie line. So we'll get this done. The crisis that is upon us now. For nearly a year, I have expressed concern about the weakness in our economy. I've called attention to a manufacturing sector that is tumbling into recession. Talked about debt loads that were unsustainable. Discussed an economy. Okay, we're good. I want to talk about a serious problem facing our country right now, about debt loads that are unsustainable, about an economy that is dependent on household and corporate borrowing instead of rapidly rising wages. The data make it clear. Our economic foundation is shaky, and a number of smaller shocks or one big shock could cause this economy to crumble. But despite these warnings, the Trump administration failed to act. And now that shock has arrived. The coronavirus is spreading worldwide and here in the United States. The stock market had its worst week since the crash of 2008. The impact on our families, particularly on babies and elderly people and people with other health challenges, could be severe. And the impact on our economy could also be brutal, putting jobs at risk, threatening savings, undermining economic stability, and even potentially destabilizing our giant, globally interconnected banks. The time to start preparing for this health crisis was years ago. And the time to prepare for the coronavirus specifically was months ago. We can't go back, but we also can't afford to waste any more time. This is a time for honest leadership that respects science.
Wow. Thank you. It is so great to be back with all of you. And I first wanted to recognize Tom Perez. I know he's out there. Your incredible governor, Roy Cooper, who I just saw out there. Someone I was so honored that she introduced me at our rally the other day in Raleigh. Chief Justice Sherry Beasley, thank you. What an incredible woman. And then, of course, all of you who are helping us turn North Carolina blue. And I wanted to start out by congratulating the Vice President on South Carolina. And now we know that all eyes are on North Carolina. So as Wayne mentioned, I really was proud to keynote your dinner a few years ago, and I did that for my friend Kay Hagan. And I miss Kay so much. Whenever I think of Kay, I think of yellow and orange. She was this person of such joy. I was honored to come back for her funeral a few months ago, and she had that last hard years, but Chip was at her side every step of the way. And one of the things that I always remember about Kay, and I think I said it when I was at your dinner last time, was one of her best lines ever, and she had many. She would always say, you know, there are two types of senators, those who spend all day on their hair, and then the women senators. The other thing that I remember about your dinner was that you promised me that you were going to restore the power of Governor Cooper's veto. And you did it. You did it. And I remember you had a candidate in every single district. You had plans and you elected a whole bunch of new people. So I love working for an entire ticket. And I think you all know a little bit about me if you saw my announcement in the middle of the blizzard. With 4 inches of snow on my head, I did it just to impress North Carolina. A lot of people predicted I wouldn't make it through that speech, and then they thought I wouldn't make it through the summer, and then I wouldn't make it to the debates, but here I am headed into Super Tuesday. And by the way, that last debate in South Carolina was one I won't forget. I don't know if you saw the photo. I don't always have viral moments because I actually try to answer the questions. And I also remember that there's a bunch of people out there watching who haven't decided yet, who may be independents, who didn't even vote in 2016. But there I was, and there was a dispute going on between the vice president and Tom Steyer, who were on either side of me. And at one point, I know Mayor Bloomberg was here earlier, the president earlier in the week had gone after him and claimed he was 5'4". I want you to know I am the only one on that stage that has the creds that I am 5'4", all right? So when I am on those debates, I stand on this little box, okay, so you can see me. So I am on my box, and those two start going at it. Vice President stays at his podium, but Tom Steyer is totally moving into my space, if you ever seen, and they're gesturing, and I cannot move back because I will fall off my box. And then I think to myself, as I'm smiling, and that is the photo, I think, you know what? If Tom Steyer accidentally hits me off that box, he's got deep pockets, so I'm going to be so okay. So in any case, our campaign has beaten the odds every step of the way. And part of that is because I believe in my soul that despite the disputes that you see on that debate stage, that what unites us is so much bigger than what divides us. And we know here in North Carolina that this election is an economic check on this president, a president who hasn't increased the minimum wage, a president who made a bunch of promises about bringing down the prices of pharmaceuticals that he hasn't delivered on, a president that promised a bunch of infrastructure that he hasn't delivered on. But we also know it is something more than that to a lot of people from this state that maybe stayed home in 2016, maybe voted for another candidate. And those are the people that I want to bring with me. Those are the people that look at this election and they think, I think I want to bring decency back to the White House. They watch this president, and they remember the days when you used to watch the president even if you didn't vote for that president, and your kids could watch the president. And now, if this president is at a rally and a kid comes in the room, the parents have to mute the volume because you have no idea what he's going to say. This election is also a patriotism check on this president. This is a president that stood next to Vladimir Putin at the G20, and when a reporter asked about Russian interference in our election, he looked at that ruthless dictator and he made a joke about it. Think about it. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their lives on the battlefield standing up for democracy. That's what World War II was about. Thousands of people from this patriotic state. 4 little girls at a church in Alabama. I'm going to be in Alabama tomorrow. 4 little girls lost their lives at the height of the civil rights movement. Innocents, simply trying to be part of our democracy, and others were trying to shove them out of it. The greatest moments and the worst moments in this country's history have been about democracy, civil rights, freedoms. That's what that lunch counter was about that I got to visit it in Greensboro just 2 days ago. It is about our democracy. And this president makes a joke about it. So what I think is this: Donald Trump's worst nightmare is that our fired up Democrats will march to victory with independents and moderate Republicans. His worst nightmare is that the people in the middle who are tired of the insults and the back and forth and the mean tweets have someone to vote for. So if you feel stuck in the middle of the extremes in our politics, you've got a home with me. So let me tell you about what I think we need to get done as a party, no matter who you are supporting. First of all, we must pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. That is all of that outside money that has come in. And this state knows this so well with that court case that I quote everywhere, where they said that the legislature had discriminated the Republicans with surgical precision against African Americans. We must restore the Federal Voting Rights Act and pass my bill to register every kid automatically in this country when they turn 18. If Target can find a pair of shoes with a SKU number in Hawaii, we should be able to register everyone in this country. What else? Getting rid of gerrymandering, something you know too well in this state, and getting rid of voting purges. My friend Stacey Abrams, who should be the governor of Georgia right now, she put it this way about purges. She said this. She said, you know, if you don't go to church or synagogue or mosque for a year or two, you don't lose your right to worship. And if you don't go to a meeting like this for a year or two, you don't lose your right under the Constitution to assemble. And if you haven't voted for a few years and you show up at the voting booth and you find out your name is not on that list, you should never lose your right to vote. That is voting purges. What else can we do? Well, we can end Donald Trump's shameful acts of trying to kick people off their insurance for pre-existing conditions. We can do that. We can take on Big Pharma and bring down the cost of prescription drugs. We can take on the NRA. And when we were in Charleston this last week, once again, you see that church. And you think about what happened in that church with the worshipers when a white...
All right, look at this. Thank you, Raleigh. Thank you. Thank you. Well, running for president is an exercise in hope and in humility, and we have come down south filled with both. We have come here asking for your vote, humbled by the knowledge that for so many, that vote was won through struggle, through blood, through sweat, through tears, and for some, within living memory. I am proud of the votes we earned, and I am determined to earn every vote on the road ahead. I want to salute all of our competitors, and I congratulate Vice President on his victory tonight in South Carolina. I want to thank the voters of South Carolina, especially black voters who showed that famous Southern hospitality over the last year, welcoming us into their homes and churches and neighborhoods and businesses. I want to thank our entire team, every supporter of this effort. And yes, everyone who has gone to PeteForAmerica.com to help us come up with that $13 million that's going to power us for the next step. I want to thank our amazing campaign family and my amazing family, especially Chasten, who has stood with me from northern Indiana all the way here to North Carolina. At this moment, as a mounting epidemic threatens our communities and our economy, we are seeing just how much it's going to matter to have serious judgment and a steady temperament in the Oval Office. Not to mention a belief in science and evidence. So more than ever, we know we cannot afford to get this wrong. We cannot afford 4 more years of Donald Trump in this country. And that means we cannot afford to succumb to the politics that have failed us. We can't go on with the politics that has us at each other's throats instead of having each other's backs. We can't go on with a politics that defines us by who we voted for in the past instead of what we can achieve together in the future. We know that the challenges of this moment are different. Pandemics crossing borders, climate catastrophe on our doorstep, automation and globalization rippling through our economy in new ways. Americans are watching as the cost of housing and health care rise while wages can't keep pace. And with so much at stake, we must be prepared to meet these challenges of the future. Americans are crying out for a new kind of leadership.
Race, because I thought that people weren't adequately addressing racial injustice in this country. And it's true. And it's true. And I thought that we were at risk as a country in terms of climate, and that expressed itself in terms of environmental injustice, and we've certainly seen that, and that's true. And that we live in a country that's deeply unjust economically, where rich people have been profiting at the expense of everybody else. And that's really true. And my family and I have been working on those things for decades. And I didn't get into this race and start talking about things to try and get votes. I was in this race to talk about things that I care the most about and that I continue to care the most about. And let me just say this, I think the team that we have, more than half people of color, more than half women, 30% LGBTQ, that is the team that I want to ride in to battle with. That is the crew, that's the crew I want on my side. So let me say this, I've never worked with a better group of people who've worked harder or in a more dedicated way. The endorsers from South Carolina are some of, I want to say, some of the most outstanding human beings I've ever met, standing up for what's right. I am so proud to be with them. And the group of people in South Carolina, I'm looking at some of them right now, are a team of people who people use these words, but I am humbled to be working side by side with those guys. I'm humbled to be working side by side by some of the women from South Carolina. And honestly, the people who've endorsed me have stood up in a very red state where I have seen things, honestly, that have broken my heart. Because as much as I've loved the people here, and I've said, I'm not leaving. You may want me out of here. I'm not leaving. We're already figuring out ways, in fact, to make sure that we stay in South Carolina. And I have loved the people, and I feel as if their fight is my fight, and I want to make sure that's true going forward. But there's no question today that this campaign, we were disappointed with where we came out. I think we got 1 or 2 delegates from congressional districts, which I thank South Carolina for, and the people. But I said, if I didn't see a path to winning, that I'd suspend my campaign. And honestly, I can't see a path where I can win the presidency. So am I gonna continue to work on every single one of these issues? Yes, of course I am, because I've never stopped. That's what I'm here for. And let me say, I kept trying to say this during the campaign, I'm a huge grassroots person. I'm a register engaged turnout person, young people, black people, Latinos, people who are overlooked. Let's make sure their voices are heard, their votes are counted. And I promise I'm gonna do that because I've been doing that. And let me say this, I, of course, will be supporting, I've said from the beginning, every Democrat is 1,000,000 times better than Trump. Trump is a disaster. And let me say this, we're in South Carolina. Lindsey Graham's a disaster. He's a disaster for the people here. So of course I'll be working on that. And let me say one last thing. When the Lord closes a door, He opens a window. I will find that window and crawl through it with you. I promise you that. I love you very much. This has been a great experience. I have zero regrets. Meeting you and the rest of the American people is the highlight of my life. I love you right back. I love you right back. Thank you so much.